go ahead and get started. Good morning. It's my pleasure to call to order the 10 a.m. special PSVS meeting of April 25th, 2024. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Committee Member Ortiz.
Here.
Committee Member Abernathy. Here. Committee Member Dewey. Here. Committee Member Coburn. Here. Committee Member Madland. Here. Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Here.
Committee Member Prince.
Here.
Committee Member Campbell.
Here.
Committee Member Rojas Mora. Here.
All right. Next item, please.
Public comments.
All right. Statements for items listed on today's agenda are given a 2-minute time limit, 20 minutes total per agenda item. If you have written comments that are longer than your verbal statement, give them to the clerk, who will give copies to the committee. If you're here to make a public statement, please fill out a public speaker card. You can find them in the back of the room, and please put it in the wood box that's on the table next to the podium area, and the clerk will retrieve it. So, Madam Clerk, do we have any public speaker cards?
We've received 3 public speaker cards on non-agenda items.
Okay.
The first public speaker is Maddie Thorpe.
Good morning, Chairman Ortiz and honorable members of the committee. My name is Maddie Thorpe, and I'm here on behalf of Lauren Skidmore, the CEO of the Open Door Network. She apologizes for not being able to be here as she's attending a conference. I'm here today to share information regarding the request for the City of Bakersfield to invest in the Open Door Network's new shelter. The Open Door Network's new shelter is estimated to be a $41 million project located at 529 Dolores Street, behind the Department of Human Services. One of the many impactful aspects of our work is that we are the only homeless shelter that supports families, and we are the only emergency shelter that accommodates children. Additionally, we are the largest provider of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking support with 3 shelters throughout Kern County and a strong partnership with district attorneys, family justice centers. We have made significant investments in our families through childcare, after-school programs, and most recently, therapy and medical programs. We believe that investing in children is key to breaking the generational cycle of homelessness and abuse and showing our youth that they can achieve a different outcome for themselves regardless of their parents' circumstances. In 2023, we served over 180 families in our homeless shelter. We housed over 60 families, and we provided therapy to 199 children dealing with severe trauma and abuse, and served over 168,000 meals. Additionally, our workforce development teams collected over 2 million pounds of trash within the city of Bakersfield. In 2023, however, we had to turn away 32 single fathers looking for shelter. We turned away 32 people. Currently, we have a wait list of 200 individuals hoping to enroll in our workforce development program. We understand that not all homelessness is met with excitement or support. Our organization is also affected by encampments, crime, and concerns, especially with our main office located downtown. While we agree that simply adding more shelter beds is not the best long-term solution, we also know from decades of experience that when people are seeking help and are turned away due to limitations of space, their problems only magnify in the eyes of the public. The proposed campus spans over 76,000 square feet and will accommodate over 350 beds, including a recuperative care wing for those exiting hospital settings. It will also include on-site childcare, after-school programs, workforce development enrollment, partnerships with educational institutions to provide certificate programs, medical and mental health services, a dining hall, a donation center, and a children's museum for the entire community to utilize. Additionally, it will provide domestic violence and sexual assault support services, as well as housing resources to ensure that all clients' needs are met. This campus has been in the planning stages since 2019 when the high-speed rail project purchased our existing property. Our lease expires at the end of 2026.
Ms. Thorpe, your time is up. If you could please bring your comments to a close.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, next speaker, please.
Wendell Wesley Jr.
Good morning. My name is Wendell Wesley Jr., residence, California Senior Housing, community member. We are asking to attain and implement the right to counsel. We received some funding. The project has not been implemented as of yet, and it is of dire needs. There's way too many issues right now that we're having with landlords. Not that all landlords are bad, most of them are good. But the problem is there are far too many being pushed out on the street. And it's very disheartening when you find out after the fact they've been evicted and due to just complaining about some mold. It's a huge problem. So we really need these right to counsel to get people housed and keep people housed so we can have a sustainable community. No one wants to see a community littered with homeless people. There's going to be a small percentage of that, but we need to do everything and resolve every situation and solution that we possibly can to ensure that people aren't just thrown out into the street. It's also very disheartening when we see that happen to senior citizens as well. A lot of them are on fixed income, and some of them now have no income at all. It's baseball season, and I like the idea of revenue sharing. That's what they do there. I think it can work here as well. And so we could learn a lot from other cities and counties and also baseball. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, next speaker, please.
Sandra Plasencia.
Good morning, Sandra Plasencia, current policy advocate with Leadership Council. Within the city of Bakersfield, Central and Southeast Bakersfield's communities are the most at risk of displacement. 41% of households have some sort of habitability issue, and 36% of households are cost burdened. The city of Bakersfield currently does not provide programs aimed to ensure families and seniors have the resources to prevent an eviction, consequently leaving families, seniors, persons with disabilities, and many other unprotected classes to fend for themselves when facing an eviction. The eviction process is incredibly nebulous. Tenants deserve a right to counsel to ensure that they are guided through the entire eviction process and that attorneys can mediate evictions before they end with a scheduled sheriff lockout. Last year, the city allocated $350,000 in last year's budget for the eviction prevention program. Today, almost a year later, we are yet to see the program be implemented. While the city has delayed the implementation of the program, about 2,500 evictions have been filed within Kern County since June of 2023. Many more families and seniors will have to inhumanely go through these traumatic eviction processes on their own until this program gets implemented. That is why we urge the Measure N committee to allocate additional funding for the program that will equate up to $2 million in funding for the eviction prevention pilot program. $2 million would only equate to 2% of the revenue generated by Measure N, according to the City of Bakersfield's mid-budget allocation. Additionally, we know that the city allocated around $7 million to address homelessness in the last budget. Over 80% of that funding is coming from Measure N revenue. These efforts are all to ensure residents receive resources after they've been evicted. As many council members have stated in the past, it is cheaper to keep folks housed than to provide support when they are on the streets. Having a well-funded EPP program will ensure tenants have education on their rights, small mom and pop landlords have access to education on their responsibilities and the changing state laws, and tenants will have access to legal counsel and attorney representation. This is extremely vital mitigation measures that will protect tenants. Lastly, we emphasize the responsibility of this committee is to the taxpayers and not the city council. As a reminder, the goal of this committee is to provide an independent verification that revenues collected are expended in consistency with the project and program services as per Resolution 009-19(1). You ensure that any expenditures from Measure N advance the original 13 priorities taxpayers identified in November of 2018. The eviction prevention program is in accordance with PSBS investment priorities to reduce homelessness, improve quality of life, create more jobs, and increase the physical stability of the city. Therefore, we urge the committee to make a referral to the City Council to allocate additional funds equating to $2 million for the start of the pilot program. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional public comment speakers, Madam Clerk?
And that was our last public speaker.
All right. I want to thank all our speakers for coming and speaking today. Madam Clerk, if you call the next item, please.
Adoption of the April 18th, 2024 regular meeting minutes.
Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes as presented by the city clerk? Okay, we have a motion from committee member Ross Mora. Do you have a second? You weren't here. You came.
I'll make a second.
Okay. We have a motion from committee member Ross Mora. We have a second by committee member Dewey. There is a question if the minutes were distributed to the committee. I believe they were via email, correct?
If the city clerk could confirm that.
The minutes were included in the agenda packet.
Okay. All right. If you could please cast your votes. Oh, to press submit.
Motion is approved with committee member Perez Andreessen abstaining.
Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Deferred business item 4A, Public Safety and Vital Services Department Strategic Initiative Overview for fiscal year 24-25.
I will turn to City Manager Clegg.
Thank you, committee members. We did our presentations on Parks and Recreation and Public Safety or Police last meeting. We did prepare some materials to take a quick look at our Economic and Community Development Department, particularly as it relates to homelessness. And we'll do that first, and then we've got a presentation to go through our Public Works streets proposals. So we'll turn it over to our director, Jenny Byers.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Okay, so the items that Economic and Community Development Department takes care of as far as PSVS priorities, we really work on 3 of the priorities, 9, 11, and 12, and those are reducing homelessness, creating jobs through economic development, business retention, attraction, and workforce development, and then also quality of life. It's a big conversation with the Economic and Community Development Department, and that's enhancing amenities throughout the community to improve the quality of life and to attract visitors. And so I'm going to go over a couple of things that were brought up at the last meeting, just so we can have some data and so you guys know. As a reminder, our request is $1.5 million for the additional emergency shelter. We have found, and I'll get ready to go through some of those numbers, that we simply don't have enough beds. And so we're working to provide additional beds because that's one of the requirements through the law, is that if you want to move people off the streets, you have to have a place for them to go. Also, we are proposing $2.5 million for the Open Door Network shelter construction, and I appreciate Maddie's comments previously that really showed the work that Open Door Network is doing in our community. And then the affordable housing program, we're proposing $3 million, and so I'm going to go through some of the wins that we've had over the past year, but also what we are planning to do in light of the conversation about the increasing prevailing wage and some of those expenses. So we have, the City Council has a committee meeting held once a month for housing and homelessness, and we're provided updates on the number of contacts that Flood Ministry is having, the number of residents or the number of guests going through the Brundage Lane Navigation Center, and then Open Door Network. This isn't their housing numbers, instead this is their job numbers, and so it's presented once a month. I had Juan put together for me what that annual number is. And so Flood Ministries in their outreach reached out or had contact with 9,006 individuals. Now it says duplicated because it's not scrubbed out month by month, new contacts, versus people that they come across. It is shown that before an individual is willing to take services, they have to have at least 4 to 6 contacts. And so when we go through these 9,006 contacts, that's how many times flood outreach met with individuals. So the unique ones per week is about 134, and that's new people, people they haven't come across. Those are the numbers that Flood Ministries is seeing. Now, they transported to the Navigation Center 628 of those individuals. They took to the Open Door Network, which ODN, we use that acronym all the time for them. They transported 115 homeless people throughout the year to Open Door Network. And then to the Mission, 137 individuals were willing to take on services. We started a program about a year and a half ago called Homebound, and that's really about family reunification. So frequently somebody will go into homelessness, their family won't know where they are. They have the conversations with the homeless individual who says, yes, I want you to reach back out to my parents. We frequently have teenagers, young adults, and so that's what the reunification program is. There were 49 that Flood Ministries put back into the homes, contacted the family and put back into the home. Brundage Navigation Center also has numbers, and so on my next slide, it's going to look like I have conflicting numbers. It's not. Flood Ministries directly reunited 49 individuals with their family members again. The Brundage Lane Navigation Center, they've had 1,133 guests, 913 were enrolled. They have guests who are graduating from their culinary arts, trying to get that job creation going. Open Door Network, you can see what their numbers are. They've had 79 new hires, 41 permanent job placements. Another funding source that we have is ARPA, and we frequently talk about ARPA and those funding resources. We did a workforce development request for proposals, and we are proposing to award Open Door Network funding. They had a great application that was going to take the homeless individuals, tie them to the Bakersfield Adult School, either getting their GED, giving them some skills, some basic skills, so that these homeless individuals can get some job placement. And so that's a different funding source, but it also goes in line. We talk about tying our funding all the time, and so that's one of the ways that we're doing that to reduce homelessness is job creation. So what has happened this past year? We're in year 3 of operations at the Navigation Center. That's a partnership with Mercy House. Altogether, almost 3,000 people have been served. This is where I have the 86 people reunited with their family, and so that's going to conflict with the other reunification program. But so altogether, these are the homeless individuals who have gone back home. We continue to assist and support the family reunification program. Like I said, you are seeing people who are returning home, and I think that's an amazing thing. Sometimes people are afraid to go back home. They're afraid to contact their family members, and so this is a program that encourages that. The Kern River Outreach Program, honestly, we have so many individuals that when they become homeless, that's where they go. It's hidden, they feel more secure, but it's not a good place to have people living. It's still, we don't say out on the streets, but they're out on the river. And so having the outreach program, it ensures that individuals are being met with and hopefully brought back into community. The Regional Action Plan to Reduce Homelessness has been funded and completed, and we're currently in implementation of that. And that's with the Bakersfield Kern Regional Homeless Collaborative. And then we've successfully brought in some new partnerships with Kern Health Systems and Kern Medical to help facilitate a coordinated and effective homeless service delivery. So at our Navigation Center, Kern Medical Center has opened beds for those recuperating. So we frequently have homeless individuals who go into a hospital to receive care. They can't stay at the hospital, but they still need assistance. Whether it's when I toured the facility, there was a female who had a broken leg, and she would have been returned to the streets. And instead, because we have these beds that Kern Medical has at the Bakersfield Navigation Center, she was able to receive treatment. And hopefully, once you've received enough treatment, you start to feel comfortable indoors again, and you can hopefully be housed. So that's one of them. And then they did expand So it's now at 249 bed capacity. We are looking at including additional beds. The 19 recuperative care beds, those are the ones I was referring to that Kern Medical Center is doing. So some amazing things have been happening at the shelter, at Open Door Network, and also at the Mission. So next I'm going to transition, unless you have some questions about homeless services. The division was just returned back to Economic and Community Development, and so I might not be able to answer all of your questions, but City Manager Clegg is also here, so hopefully if you have questions, we can assist in that. Keep going.
Question.
Oh, please.
I have a question. How do you audit these numbers that these various agencies give you, or the number of people? How do you verify this is all solid numbers, and or they just fill out a form and send it to you, or how's that work?
They do fill out a form and send it to us, but we also have a program, it's the HMIS, and Homeless Management Information Systems, and that is a program that's utilized to capture data about every individual served. Flood Ministries will insert into that program every contact they have, and so there are kind of this way of finding out if the numbers are true, because I think that's a question that most of the community would ask. How are you really saying that you impacted this number? And it's through that HMIS reporting.
By the same entity?
So it's cross-referenced, and so what Flood will do, if they take someone to one of the shelters, then the shelter takes over that input of that person. And so there's a lot of cross-access in this data.
Okay.
I would also add that we have a meeting every other week with all of these partners in what we call a referral network. And we have check-ins with those individuals on a bi-weekly basis, and then we'll go and do ride-alongs and site visits. It's kind of like other operations where it's really a random sampling. It's not like we have a supervisor on site, doing oversight of those contracts. But we do ride-alongs and we do site visits throughout the year as random sampling checkups to validate the information.
I'll jump in here. So you obliquely mentioned the Grants Pass decision. So the court cases that basically say that for municipalities to enforce no camping ordinances, that there has to be adequate shelter capacity. As I'm sure you all know, this case has been taken up by the Supreme Court. The organization, my employer, filed an amicus brief in it. In that case, and arguments were heard last week, and who knows what the Supreme Court, will ultimately do in that. But I guess my question is, how much shelter capacity that's being shelter capacity expansion, so bed expansions, are the result of the fact that we have need, and how much of it is it to create almost like padding so that we're compliant with that Grants Pass decision, so that we can enforce some of these ordinances around no camping and tents on sidewalks and other things?
I'll take that first shot at that one, Ms. Byers. So good question. And we're also asking ourselves, by the way, already, what could be some of the possible outcomes and how we'll be ready and respond to those, just, for the benefit of the committee's knowledge. We also track on a weekly basis how many turnaways we have of people who are not accepting service and people who are accepting service. And I would also note, because I'm going to give some macro numbers and then narrow down to some smaller numbers, but we have. If you look at the point-in-time count, which we know is only a point in time, it's not perfect, but if you look at snapshots of the prior years, and our point-in-time count's not out for this year, although it will be out, probably by next month. But if you even look at prior years, we're looking at, within the city boundaries, roughly, 1,700 individuals who are experiencing homelessness, and about half of those are sheltered, and about half of those are unsheltered. And so even if we're off by a few numbers, if you've got 800 plus individuals that are unsheltered, we know that there's still a significant gap in sheltering. The reasons, though, for why they're unsheltered or where they could go or why they go there, that's another factor, and I'll come to that in just a moment. if we really look at the entire system, because when we say sheltered, unsheltered, those are really individuals that are either currently homeless or in one of our emergency shelters, but we have thousands of individuals that have gone through the coordinated entry system that are in some level of supportive housing. So we have supportive housing, permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and some of our emergency sheltering. So we have probably in the ballpark of 8,000 to 9,000 individuals who have received assistance at some level of the spectrum of housing assistance in the community, but those that are experiencing more severe homelessness, you're really talking about that 1,800 individuals. But we know that there's been 800 individuals, roughly plus or minus the last couple of years that have been unsheltered. To narrow down a little bit more specifically, when we have flood ministry report out their contacts, we ask them to report whether or not individuals are willing to accept services and go to a shelter bed or not. Early on, we were seeing that those numbers were about a third of individuals that they contacted would say, I don't want a bed, I just, I want to do my own thing. And again, we know that the reasons for that could be varied, maybe because they're not comfortable in a congregate setting, maybe because for some, they know there's certain rules and they don't necessarily want to follow some of those rules. Others, maybe they're comfortable in, what they might call an urban camping lifestyle. But at least a third of individuals were saying, I don't want a shelter bed. We have recognized, by the way, that it is valuable to have a number of variety of different types of beds, because maybe somebody who doesn't want to be inside four walls, but they'll go to a safe campsite, that is an option. Or maybe they'll go to a tiny home, but they don't want to be in a large dorm room. So those are considerations as well. But again, back to the number, a third of individuals were saying, no thanks, I don't want any services. Over time, as we were able to place a lot of folks into shelters and into housing, and you'll note on this slide a number we didn't highlight a lot, but 349 individuals are now in permanent housing. Folks who were living on the streets in the last 3 years are now in their own home. It may be an apartment or home, but they have their own place and they were on the streets, 350 individuals. So as we've been able to help people get housed and get shelter, those numbers of those refusing services shifted. We saw at certain points upwards of 60 or 65% of individuals saying, I don't want a shelter bed. I don't want to be placed. We recently seen that number go back down. We're closer to 50% right now, just by the numbers. But the other number that is compelling for us is that at Brundage Lane Navigation Center, we keep a list of how many individuals are turned away every month because we don't have a space for them. And so we range usually somewhere plus or minus 60 individuals every month we turn away who said, I'll take a bed, and we don't have a bed for them. It's about 60 individuals. And we also track the reasons why, whether it was because they had a pet and they didn't want to leave their pet and we didn't have a bed available that was associated with our pet spaces, because we do have pet spaces, or whether it was male, female, or a couple that were looking for that type of bed space. But yeah, we have a regular waiting list of at least 60 individuals just at our shelter, let alone the wait lists at the other shelters. So we are always strategic about making sure that we have that empty bed to help place that person who really needs to be there, or who frankly may need some diversion or accountability as we can. But typically we have at least 60 individuals who would take a bed and don't have a bed.
Committee Member Matland. Any other questions you want to go to?
Hi. I do have to comment that the way your program's laid out, there are so many options, I think, for people, who are either coming out of that situation and with mental health issues. I think the options you're giving are broad and wonderful. Working with the mental health crisis and the hospital and BPD, there's good options there, and the expansion. But the problem, I guess my question is, in regards to building and getting more beds, I see you're dealing with prevailing wage. the prevailing wage, I assume, is based on probably a union number, which is really not that realistic here in Kern County. Their number versus, a private contractor and what he could get it done for. I mean, if you get extra 1 or 2 beds, good for you, but what do you see about getting, I mean, I know that's a sticking point, but you're gonna get more bang for your buck, getting that off the table. Any options for the prevailing wage makes, the cost on these units, I think, is exorbitant, number one.
Thank you, committee member. Good comment, and reminds us to be a little more specific about some of the what staff is recommending as the most cost-effective options for these emergency bed expansions. So when we did the large expansion of 100 additional beds at Brundage Lane Navigation Center, that was a very large project. It was excuse me, additional construction and renovation of the former Calcott facility, and it was an expensive project. For this expansion, we really are at the physical limit of the current building to do new construction of additional square footage. We're not asking to actually increase square footage. This is a proposal to find ways to add 50 beds within the existing facility. There will be ongoing operating costs for that. But there won't be construction costs for this particular proposal that's in this budget cycle. There are other options to create beds, and this has not been fully determined. It's important to point out, I think, by staff or city council, but we've been asked to assess the different options for additional beds, like safe camps, tiny homes, in addition to just straight shelter beds, because again, we know we need a variety, and frankly, some cost more than others, to your point. So we're looking at all those different options, and we're not necessarily recommending that we build a new brick and mortar large facility or add on to our current shelter. It's really, how can we get probably another 50 to 100 beds at that price with some creative work. And we're even, contemplating, partnering with other entities that, may have some of these types of operations. Can we just add a few more beds on their sites as well? So we're looking at all those options, because 1.5 million wouldn't really construct us much. This is actually some funding to help operate additional beds at existing sites and find where we can add a few more beds.
Yes. But really, my point is, getting the prevailing wage taken out of the language in some of this stuff, and getting, actual real numbers from Kern County, what it costs here to build, remodel, even, on adding the beds, there's got to be some remodeling for aid,
Thank you.
and restrooms and everything.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right, I didn't address the prevailing wage piece of the question. We're keenly aware of the prevailing wage costs, but any public dollar spent on a project requires prevailing wage, and there could be really the if you were to say what would be a solution to change that, that's state legislation, and significant advocacy there that I would anticipate would have significant opposition, but really it's a prevailing wage is just a state requirement we have.
Oh, it's a state requirement, nothing we can do here in
No.
the county. Okay, thank you.
Committee Member Rojas Mora.
So I noticed that you provided information on the permanently housed. Do you also track recidivism rates for those, or how many come back and how long they are?
It is tracked. I was just kind of giving this overview of what's been happening. That is something we can add in next year's presentation, so you can see how many come back. And I think we're getting more and more into the conversation, and Ms. Placencia referenced it as well, is we have the homeless shelter, we've been building units, but what happens in between? What is the keeping them housed or getting them into the housing units that is kind of that transitional? And so we're really just starting to dive into that space Particularly, that's one of the reasons homeless services came back with affordable housing is where can we meet the needs of those in between? And we are finding that that's a huge number. Before even going into homelessness is important, staying out of that. But then also, the quicker people are able to get out, the more successful they'll be. 1 year is an important marker in data that those who are in homelessness for greater than 1 year become harder and harder to house. And we have some individuals that have been homeless for 10, 20, 30 years even, and those become the very, very difficult. And so what can we have that gets them used to 4 walls around them, that gets them used to, and that's what we like about the tiny home kind of project is they're still very close services, but 4 walls that they're sleeping in, and then moving them into, and so it becomes this whole range of projects and programs and tracking of individuals.
A couple of,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add a couple data points, if I may. So to the question, most of the funding that has been allocated to place individuals into permanent supportive housing or transitional housing does typically, it's a best practice, but also typically the funding comes with some requirements to do some case management wraparound services, which is good. You know, individuals who are sort of relearning some of those pro-social behaviors, sometimes it's a long journey. And so we actually have a lot of data over a 2-year period for individuals that have, especially the state HAP funding that we've been using over the last 2 to 3 years. We've been tracking through that case management and navigation, what is their retention rates. And so individuals that have been placed into housing from, and this is collectively the city, the county, and the homeless collaboratives funding that has come from the state, the retention rate is above 90%. We're between 92 and 95% of individuals placed into permanent supportive housing stay in permanent supportive housing after 2 years. That's a really good number and a really important number. So individuals that make it through the journey to that point, we are seeing very good success in them staying housed. Where we don't have as much data, but we're starting to really dig into the data right now, is on individuals who may be sort of cycling through multiple shelters, multiple diversion programs, maybe in and out of substance abuse treatment, in and out of behavioral health treatment. Frankly, our systems aren't designed to capture that data. They haven't been historically. It hasn't been, frankly, as big of a problem as it is today. And so we're now saying we're going to have to start collecting that data better. But the folks who are experts in this space and just know these people by name and keep seeing them come through know that we are seeing some individuals cycle through program after program after program. And it is not a good use of our resources. And those are the questions we're asking about. How do we make programs and systems more effective? We're starting to dig further into that data, and we're finding that it's a smaller number of individuals are taking up huge amounts of the supportive services resources available. And if we can really help address underlying issues and get those individuals to better circumstances, then it's going to be a far less of a burden on the overall system, because they continue to sort of repeat and cycle through. And then the last data point that I would just add is that one of our biggest challenges is about inflow of homeless. We've actually done a pretty darn good job of getting people sheltered and housed and treated. But for every 6 individuals we place into permanent housing in Kern, we're seeing 10 new homeless individuals on the streets. I don't know that our agenda today was to try and untangle why we're continuing to see that inflow, but it is our reality of how do we sort of combat chronic homelessness and encampments, and how do we provide services and resources. The reality that our community should know is that we're seeing new people become homeless on a monthly basis, and that's creating huge strains on the system.
And so as a follow-up question then, and because you referenced it, and I heard the earlier comments that funding for the project was put into place, but the project has not yet been implemented for the eviction prevention pilot program. What is the delay in if they've already been allocated funding in implementing the program?
So several times we'll do a request for proposal. We'll get those proposals in. We review them. There's sometimes negotiations. There's sometimes items that need to be removed from it. And so staff is still in review of those that had submitted proposals.
I would also just, add to that, and I confirm everything Ms. Byers has shared. As we looked at creating a very new program, we've never done this before. We took some time through the first 6 months of the year to really look at how other people are doing it, try and build this thing right. And so we didn't issue the RFP until November of 2023, just to be transparent. Even though the funding was available in July, we were trying to do our homework, put the plan together of what this really should look like. And I expect, because this is something that is a pilot and new, we're probably going to have to make some adjustments along the way as we learn and experience.
I was only going to touch on one other thing when we were talking about the point in time. And so the point in time date is scheduled by HUD, which is Federal Housing and Urban Development. And there's some specific questions that are asked that I think are worth noting. And the questions specifically are, where did you sleep last night? And so is that shelter? Is it someone's couch? Is it on the streets? Is it wherever? And so that's one of the points that's tracked. Where were you last housed? Where did you last have housing? And what they find year after year in these point in time counts is it is local, and that is found nationwide. I don't know what the percentage is going to be this year, but in every jurisdiction, it's usually in that high 80 to 90% that the answer to where did you last have housing is in the location that they are. So I know that there's a lot of conversations that they're being bussed here, and yes, people are frequently bussed in and out of all, but they tend to return back to where they know. They tend to return back to where they know they can get services. So those are important questions that are asked annually, and we'll find out what that data is.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Byers. And I think you have some folks here who have participated as actual volunteers in the point in time count and have asked that question of folks. We'll go to Committee Member Coleman and then Committee Member Matland.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. I think my question is more directed to the city manager. We have, and not even looking at what we've already committed to, a city council has already committed to over the last couple of years, but we're looking for another 2.5 here, another 3 million here. What's becoming prominent statewide is there's a lot of questions about the money that the state is spending on the homeless issue. And a lot of it can't be accounted for. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you're tracking this to make sure that this money actually goes to the programs that we intend it for, that it gets used properly by those people that we partner with. And how you account for that. So,
yeah, thanks, committee member. A couple thoughts on that. One, I can tell you that our original, spending in support of homelessness 4 years ago was as simple as the federal monies that were coming to the city. We were passing them through to some of the service providers. At this stage, we're spending close to $20 million a year of general fund monies on homelessness. And I'll give a quick breakdown of that, even though that wasn't precisely what you asked, but I think it's worth just noting. In addition to that, we are passing through still more, significant dollars from the state and some one-time federal monies, but also we've seen, in the region, $8 to $9 million a year from state monies to homelessness for the last 4 or 5 years, and the biggest portion is goes to the city. Another portion goes again to the county, and another to the Continuum of Care, the collaborative. So, but the general fund monies, of course, the biggest chunk that we spend on is our navigation center. So that's a $6.5 million a year contract to run our navigation center. We have very tight management of that contract. We talk with them formally every week, and every day we're in conversation with them, but they also provide for us significant reporting, and we do actually have folks on site regularly, validating, verifying that information about clients served. And actually, not just by Mercy House, but we have clients being served by Kern Medical and Kern Behavioral Health Systems. They're on site because we have, the treatment rooms that we're also tracking how many individuals are, getting therapy, getting medical treatment, getting housing assistance, getting, job training, getting job placement. We have all of those numbers, and we manage that really close and really tight. Probably the next biggest portion of funding is to our rapid response teams. Those are our code enforcement officers. And of course, we're tracking that data. Those are our employees. We have very rich data on how many encampments that they address every year, how many tons of trash are removed, how many individuals are referred into services, and a variety of other data for our code enforcement teams. We're also spending some funds that we're categorizing as in support of homelessness on the impacts of homelessness, meaning funding to go and just do cleanups. And so we did on this one, by the way, to sort of some of this question of oversight, we have now 11 contracts 11 teams on contract with 3 different private entities. Well, one is the Open Door Network, so a nonprofit, that are going as cleanup crews and cleaning up litter and debris throughout the city, but also in direct response to homeless encampment cleanups. And so, admittedly, we had so many of those crews going around, we were finding it was hard for us to make sure we had good eyes on all of the work of those crews, and so we hired a supervisor in Public Works who goes out and makes sure that those crews are delivering on the contract obligations that we have with our contracted entities. And again, we're tracking bags of trash, tons of trash, number of sites cleaned up. We take pictures before and after every encampment interaction that we have. We take pictures before and after to demonstrate both that we've followed the law and tried to address the needs with service and compassion first of those individuals, but then if they don't comply, they are vacated, and then we demonstrate that we have cleaned the area up. And so we are keeping strong records on our code enforcement as probably our second biggest expense. We also have the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is part of that $20 million. It's been $5 million a year historically. We're recommending just $3 million this year. We're tracking how many units get built. That is brick and mortar, so that is a little bit easier to track. But also there's lots of requirements from the state and the feds on the reporting and tracking for those types of affordable housing dollars. And so we're demonstrating how many units are we getting and who's going into those units. And there's confirmations and validations that those individuals are at those income levels based on what AMI level those units have been dedicated towards. So on the affordable housing front, there's also close tracking there. Then we have some other dollars, but these start to get into smaller amounts. We have the biohazard cleanup crew that goes downtown, but we're also tracking on a weekly basis how many sites they're spraying, and we have our crews that are validating those cleanups. We have some dollars that go towards some other supportive services to the homeless. Our outreach contracts with Flood, we've already talked about that we're having biweekly meetings and then sampling of site visits for the care, or for the contacts that they're making with individuals. And so there's just some of the ways that we're tracking that. But the fact that I can tell you I know it's $20 million and we have all these different programs is because within really the last 2 years, but also this year in particular, we said, a lot of this grew organically. We started with 1 or 2 programs, and now we have a dozen programs. And it wasn't the question asked either, but let me just note to that. Typically, you wouldn't see this type of growth of the number of programs, but this is issue number 1 of our community that we continue to hear nonstop is help do something about this crisis. And so we continue to look at those solutions that are going to have the biggest impacts. And so we've gotten a lot smarter about knowing exactly how much money is going into which programs, coordinating all of those efforts in ways that we didn't necessarily at the beginning when we started, 3 and 4 years ago. We were putting these different, pilot programs together. We're now, for example, we have a group that's called our Community Vitality Group, and they're coordinating all of our encampment responses through these 4 or 5 different teams, all through one command center. We didn't do that at the beginning, but we found that we need to do that now just to make sure, one, we do have good understanding of accountability. Also, we want to just be really efficient with our taxpayer dollars and not duplicate any work. And then also, we got to be smart about how we're using those dollars to the biggest impact. Again, there's a small number of individuals that are, calling upon a lot of these resources. And if we can address some of those underlying issues, we think we can save a lot of taxpayer dollars by getting at those issues instead of just cycling through problems over and over again.
Thank you. It does sound like you have a pretty good handle on it. I don't remember what you told us the annual budget is for this year for the city.
We don't actually have the final number,
Got a
by the way,
guess?
for the full city. We're this last year was $780 million. We're probably going to be $790 million this coming year. And again, PSVS is 103 in revenues, but we anticipate recommending appropriating about 115 for PSVS.
So we don't even spend 10% of our general budget on homelessness then.
So the $780 million is the full budget, including enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
So our general fund budget is 300.
I don't know who you're looking.
No, you don't have to give me an exact number. Just give me a ballpark.
So yeah, we're in the $300 million range, but yeah, $20 million out of the $300 million. You're right. It's not the largest portion. If you were to look at a pie chart, police, fire, biggest expenses. And but then homelessness is getting up there as probably one of the next large ones, whereas again 4 years ago it was 0.
And my last question, I'm sorry. The last question is really the issue I think that people are sensing at the state level, and then that filters down to the city in terms of wasted money on homeless programs. I think is admin cost and study cost and paying for research and design. Those fees are not managed well. Can you talk a little bit about how you may control that? One of the things we do in nonprofit, we look at we have investments or contributions coming in. What percentage of those contributions actually go to whatever your service is, and how much is that admin piece? And when it gets over a certain percentage, then people that contribute start to get nervous. So I think the people of California are starting to get nervous. So what is that? How do we manage that?
Yeah, good question. And that is a number that I don't have off the top of my head of like how many staff are sort of more on the administrative side versus the operational side. But what I will say is, Bakersfield has always had a very lean staff. We don't have our per capita staffing for general government is very low. It's even still low for public safety, police and fire, and it's even lower still for some of our other operations like homelessness. So if you think about our team who manages, tens of millions of dollars of pass-through monies from the state and the feds, it's 3 people. We only have 3 people that are managing these $30, $40, $50 million of contracts for both affordable housing and one side, and then it's 3 individuals for affordable housing, 3 individuals for homelessness. And then the rest is just at the management level. We don't have other dedicated staff for the admin side of homelessness and affordable housing. It's just those 6 individuals, as well as their sort of management and executive oversight. The rest of our teams are either the rapid response teams that are in the field, or our police teams that are in the field, our impact teams, as well as our contract providers. So we're a very lean team. We can't afford a lot of that admin overhead. And then as far as the studies go, we have felt the need to just respond quickly and timely. And, I guess would have been nice to have time to sit back and, do lots of analysis and, peer research, but we didn't really have time for that. And so we jumped in and we did some I think, quality but quick analysis and then got to work. And so we really haven't spent monies as a city on much analysis. We've done that in-house, and then we've just put out contracts for the pieces that we think are, most impactful. So yeah, we have very low overhead at the city.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you. Committee Member Matland.
Once again, great job with your programs and the diversity of them. But I have a question. You brought up you've housed 6 people, and then you have 11 come in. Were they Kern County evictions?
So the numbers that I gave of like for every 6 that we place into housing, there's 10 new. That's a general number. It's not specific to individuals. We don't necessarily like. There's many different ways that those 10 are coming in. And I would just since you noted eviction as one particular possible way that folks come into homelessness. Typically, those that are chronically homeless, it's been several steps have happened. When maybe you are evicted, often folks land on a friend's couch, or maybe they're staying in their car, which again is not ideal either. But then, when you're in those difficult circumstances, it's harder to hold down the job. It's harder to get the kids to school, get to work on time, and then it can devolve into more levels of chronic homelessness. And so we see a variety of sort of ways that people come into homelessness. But I would note, for the record, the vast majority of individuals that are chronically homeless also have one or both of a mental health challenge or substance use challenge. We're able to, again, rapidly rehouse or help many individuals who are looking for services and need those services, but individuals that end up as chronically homeless, there's usually many compacting factors. So we don't have hard numbers on how many individuals that are going into our HMIS system that was noted earlier, got into that state of homelessness as a result of evictions. I don't think we have data.
I don't mean hard numbers, but your ballpark 6 and then you have 11. Are they the drop-offs downtown at, near the bus station, which are pretty substantial? And then you go into one of the other issues that's going to come up is, number one, more beds, and then you have the 6 and then 11 ballpark. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's, and then, but then moving into monies for legal assistance when, are a lot of these people being dropped off? And then we're gonna then use monies where we could put more beds in on another program. Once we get there, there's stuff on the Assembly and Senate floor of all kinds of ideas for that particular issue. So when that comes up, but it's, are we spending money on drop-off people that?
And when you say drop-off people, are you referencing folks out of the criminal justice system
No,
or
people
from other
coming in
folks?
by bus downtown.
So,
And that's, we don't need to do a study on it. Everyone sees it. And
this starts to get really complicated, but I'll give my best, summary that I think will answer the question. So we do know, again, that folks come into homelessness in a variety of ways, as well as, we do have a fair amount of data on the individuals who are experiencing chronic homelessness in Kern. Where are they from? How did they get here? So more than 90% of individuals experiencing homelessness in Kern County are from Kern County. They're not from other places. There's 10% though that we have found that are from other places. We do know that there are some cities that are doing just what we're doing, which is that when we say family reunification, That is, our focus is on making sure that individuals have a good place to land and stay successfully housed back with family members that can support them. But that really means is, you know, if you want us to get you a bus ticket to go back home, that's what we're doing. We're getting folks back home. And so we've had some anecdotal, confirmed instances where someone says, well, yeah, I'm from Oakland, but I said I had a cousin in Bakersfield, and they helped me get to Bakersfield. But then their cousin said, you know, you can't stay with us. So we helped them get back to Oakland. So most of the individuals that are coming through public transit drop-offs, because we've been doing the homework, we've been looking into who are these folks, where are they coming from, how are they landing here. A vast majority are actually individuals who are coming out of public safety or criminal justice system supervision. So those are folks who have been given that, you know, bus pass because they're coming out of some kind of custody, and they're you know, that's where they were before they, you know, went into supervision, and so they're given a bus pass to go back to where they were, you know, before supervision. And we've had deep conversations with our partners at, you know, CDCR as well as the Sheriff's Department, that at a minimum, you know, and I would argue, you know, these are individuals who are coming back to our community one way or another, period. So we have to figure the best way to take care of our Bakersfield and Kern family. You know, they're going to be part of our community. Let's find the best ways to both serve them and, when necessary, help them be accountable. So we've asked, at a minimum, we need to know when these folks are coming so that we can have our outreach services and supportive services ready to go on site and ready to connect them and tie them in, so that it's not a question of sort of wandering around and trying to find help, or maybe not trying to find help. We need to get folks connected much quicker, because right now what's happening is the bureaucracies aren't talking to one another, the systems aren't connected, and so folks fall through the gaps. And those are things that we do think we can control, is at least coordinating and having our services available, because we can't control necessarily the releases and the numbers and those individuals. You know, do we see some people sort of, you know, transient come and go through Kern? Absolutely. There's some, you know, interesting new phenomena where, again, people call it urban camping, and there's these apps out there that people say, where's an easy place to camp? And they all have phones, and they can get on these apps and say, here's an easy place to go and camp, and here's a place where there's services and resources. Some of that happens, but to your point about like how many, that's a very small percentage. Is that 5%, you know, 10%, maybe? But the largest numbers are, these are folks from Kern that, and there's a certain percentage that just fall on hard times. And we ask these questions in the point in time count. Is it because of economic conditions? Is it because you lost a job? Is it because you just don't have resources? Or is it because, you know, you do have, you know, somewhat of, you know, a history or a record that makes it hard to get housed? Or is it, you know, because, you know, have you been in treatment programs, whether that is for mental health or substance abuse? And again, just broad estimates by the numbers, you're probably looking at least 60 to 70% of individuals who are experiencing, again, one or both of behavioral health challenges or substance use challenges. The individuals that, you know, maybe are coming here from other places, or that you know, might have, you know, just simply been because of an eviction. Those are smaller percentages of the overall population. The bigger percentages, again, are folks that have chronic issues and challenges.
Thank you.
There's also some other things that we haven't really talked about necessarily in homelessness, but it's that area between homelessness and affordable housing. Since 2019, home values have risen 60% in Kern County. And with that, rents have also raised. We sit at about 2.5% to 4% vacancy rate at any given time, which is so low, which means there are so very few units that are available. SB, I think it's 1680. There's 1,200. How many bills are done every single year? 2,100 bills, so I might not have this bill correct. But SB 1680 was rent control, that you're allowed to raise rent one time per year, up to 10%. But these values in apartments have gone up proportionate to the 60% increase. And so what we're finding is that it's not necessarily always an illegal eviction. It is still called eviction, but there's just eviction under this Senate bill. And if somebody wants to raise their rent more than the 10% that's allowed by the state, then what they'll do is come up with one of the excuses that's allowed to have people exit that rental unit. But it's really, some of it has to do with that cost increase that our community is seeing.
Yeah, the taxes and insurance certainly hit that number. I mean, they're not,
Yeah.
90% of the insurance companies have pulled out of California, and 80% are not rewriting, so.
Yeah, there's a
There's our
lot of
10
external
You know, it would just be
challenges,
difficult to
yeah.
be in the rental business.
And then committee member Vice Chair Campbell had a question. Sorry.
Mr. Clegg, the Flood Ministries Street Outreach Program, are you familiar with the mission statement of that program?
I have seen it, but I don't recall it.
Okay. Do you recall it having anything to do with restoring people to self-sufficiency with, getting their own job and paying for their own housing?
I don't recall if that's there, but that is one of our goals, is self-sufficiency.
All right. Is any of the money that you give to these organizations to assist with the homeless problem tied to any incentives related to restoration of people to self-sufficiency?
I would say not directly, no.
Okay, and so it looks like when they apply for money, they give you a lot of counting stats, like the numbers that we saw in this presentation, including 9,006 annual contacts. That kind of statistical data is provided to you, right?
Correct.
Okay, so when we see 600 people contacted, that's about 15 contacts per person to get to 9,000 contacts. And when we give out grant money based on these kind of counting stats, we're incentivizing the counting stats, where we tell people, well, go see the same people 15 times, and that is an impressive number that we can present to the council to get more money for your organization. Are you familiar with how much money the County of Los Angeles and the City of Los Angeles spent on homelessness in the last few years?
I'm not.
It's billions of dollars, tens of billions. California has 39 million people, which is about 12% of the nation's population. We have 50% of the nation's homeless population. In Los Angeles County, the sheriff characterized a network of quote-unquote nonprofit organizations that may technically qualify under the tax code as nonprofit, collecting these billions of dollars, paying staff members as much as $800,000 or $900,000 a year in salaries to administer these programs, with no incentive to restore people to self-sufficiency. In fact, it was all based on these kind of counting stat numbers. You show us that you're providing services, whatever that is, to a large number of people or a small number of people multiple times, we will subsidize you to the tune of billions of dollars. What has happened in Los Angeles as a result of this? The number of homeless people has ballooned. That's one of the reasons we have 50% of the nation's homeless in this state, is that we incentivize it, we subsidize it, we encourage it. The other side of that is the criminal aspect of this. The state of California has, for some reason, decided we don't care about drug addiction anymore. We don't care about treatment for drug users. We don't care about any kind of penalties, criminal penalties, for the crime that comes from drug use, and the specifically theft crimes and property crimes. So as a result, we've incentivized lawlessness, and we've permitted it. And now we're subsidizing it with services on the back end without actually trying to restore these people to self-sufficiency. It's a very paternalistic and arrogant attitude to have, to look at a homeless person and say, oh, well, we're writing you off as someone who can take care of yourself. We're going to just provide you services perpetually. And I don't think when the voters in this city voted for Measure N, when they saw the one line in that paragraph of all the wonderful things the city was going to provide with the Measure N money, when it said address homelessness, I don't think that the people of Bakersfield intended to turn Bakersfield into Los Angeles as a place where we're going to fund without any accountability or any goals that are actually useful goals, a perpetual homelessness industrial complex. So my question is, what measures does the city of Bakersfield take to ensure that these nonprofits that are receiving these funds are actually putting them to good use rather than creating for themselves a perpetual demand that only they can fill?
So, good question. I would reflect first that there are multiple pieces to providing services. And so you started your question with some questions about flood ministries in particular, but also then looked at a much more macro level of all of homeless services and how do we really get to outcomes. So specifically for flood as an example is, flood's job is not to necessarily get those individuals to self-sufficiency. We've asked flood to go and contact these individuals, identify who they are, offer them services, and then connect them to other providers that are walking them along that path towards self-sufficiency, which is a multi-step process. That's just one example about flood, but to the broader question, what are we doing? So ultimately, our goal is to get individuals housed, to get individuals working, and to get individuals to become self-sufficient. I'm not claiming that our efforts are perfect, nor that the state or the national system of support is perfect, because it's definitely not. But we're working within, frankly, sort of, to a degree, a system that is there and that we have. And so there are many other providers that are really important in this, and the city is not the only player, and we should not be the only player. And in fact, the city is newer to this space, frankly, out of necessity and community demand that something more happens around homelessness. And so we're leaning in. But in our regional collaborative around homelessness, there's 30, 40 different associations or organizations that are providing different types of services. And I think one of the roles that's important for the city and the county to play is to try and be conveners to help facilitate, along with these other partners, to make sure we're having a coordinated strategy that addresses each of the different needs across the spectrum of needs and continues to move folks towards self-sufficiency. And so we actually have a regional action plan that has been in development for the last about 2 years. It is actually coming forward to the board of the Regional Homeless Collaborative in the next couple of months, and then it will subsequently go to the city council and the board of supervisors to support this action plan that identifies very specific metrics and targets, as well as the actions that are going to get us towards those targets. How many permanent supportive housing units do we need? Who's going to build those units? And then how do we make sure that the right people are getting into those units? And so we are looking at how we spend our dollars, all again in the steps that it will take to get people through the long journey back to self-sufficiency. And again, different folks are going to have to play different roles. We want some of this to be, that outreach, but also some of it has to be, frankly, accountability. And I'll come back to that because you mentioned the some of the low-level offenses that are not really being followed up on. And I do want to address that for the committee because it's a big piece that we haven't talked about yet. The last thing I would just say on sort of how do we hold folks accountable? How do we make sure that those dollars are going well and are rebuilding a homeless industrial complex in Bakersfield? I would argue that the scale at which we are paying people here is vastly different than the examples that you gave for Los Angeles. Individuals who have looked at wages for entry level as well as executives in our local nonprofits, it is not above market compensation. I can affirm that. Also, we're just talking about a much different scale. We're fortunate here, again, as I gave some of the numbers earlier, to have less than 2,000 homeless individuals in Bakersfield. While I know that's very frustrating for people who've lived in Bakersfield their whole lives, less than 2,000. people, at least, by the point in time count numbers. With Los Angeles having tens of thousands of homeless, I'm glad that's not my job. So we're looking at a different scale, and again, the compensation that is frankly available, the amount of city resources, county resources, and even state resources to our local nonprofits is pretty meager. They're not getting a lot of resources. But I think your comments are well stated, and that we should always guard against that. We have to make sure that we're not just funding the activity, we're funding the outcome. And so we have established outcome-based goals through this regional action plan, and that's what we want to fund, as well as we're trying to achieve outcomes as opposed to just activities. Let me shift gears to the public safety factor. And you didn't ask this precise question, but it's a topic that I did want to address, and I think it gets at some of the comments that you raised, and happy to come back to other questions you may have. But frankly, and I've been open about this with our community, and we've been open about this in the city's advocacy to the state. While the city's approach has been a individual first and service first approach, we want to take good care of members of our Bakersfield family, as I stated earlier. Sometimes members of the family who are not treating the rest of the family well, sometimes they need a little bit of a timeout. They need some accountability. And currently, our systems of accountability are not working in California. And we are often fairly aggressively by the community. We get feedback from folks saying, why isn't the city doing something about this? Why isn't the city preventing window smashings, store thefts? Why aren't you, cleaning up homelessness? And so we're keenly aware of the frustration of the community. And we've looked hard at, again, what are the systems and potential solutions for us. And because of the Public Safety Vital Services tax, we have enough law enforcement officers to make arrests. We can make arrests all day long. That's not a problem. The problem is, what do you do after an arrest? Where does an individual go? This gets to the Grants Pass and Boise a little bit as well. Let's say the Supreme Court says, every community, you get to decide how to address homelessness in your communities because you know best. That doesn't mean tomorrow we can, there's 800 individuals that are unsheltered. Where do they go? Currently, I'll just give some data that I've shared publicly in recent months. We're tracking very closely how many individuals are being arrested for some of these sort of what we would consider quality of life crimes, vagrancy crimes, and in particular, just in the downtown area, our impact unit in the month of February arrested 190 individuals. Of those 190 individuals, 170 of them were, and these were arrestable offenses. This isn't just for, standing on the sidewalk. These individuals committed crimes. They were arrested, and 170 of those individuals were booked and released from jail within 15 hours. There's no space for them to be held in the jail to hold them accountable for those arrestable offenses. I don't think that jail spaces are always the best space for folks to recuperate from mental health needs or behavioral or health needs or substance use needs. But many individuals that are in those situations are not making good decisions on their own behalf, and they're not choosing to go into treatment programs. Historically, if they were given the option to go into a treatment program or to stay in jail, they chose for treatment programs. Today, people will say, no, I'll stay in jail, because they know they won't, because they're going to be released quickly. And so we're very well aware of that, and I don't think that was even the intentions of some reforms of the criminal justice system, but I think that's what's been the result. And so we'd much rather take good care of our community members, but without that accountability to say, if you don't, you're going to have to stay here in this jail. Folks aren't choosing to take those services and to, get to a place where they can become self-sufficient again. And so we are advocating that we need reforms that will help create an incentive, even if that's the stick instead of the carrot. If they won't take the carrot, the stick's got to still be there, in my opinion. We start with the carrot, but we still need the stick. And ultimately, we want to divert folks into the places where they're going to get the help that they really need, but we need jail beds to do that. We've just found that the current, over the last 4 years, trying to encourage and cajole folks into those programs is not working. There needs to be a certain level of accountability that is involuntary at a certain level, especially when it's having dramatic impacts on communities and quality of life and just a state of orderliness. So what you do not see in this budget proposal is something that you did see last year. We set aside $2 million to help with regional partnerships around this accountability issue. We have not spent those dollars, and so we're going to be carrying those forward to next year, but we're in conversations with the county to help them accelerate their ability to create jail bed spaces dedicated for chronic low-level offenders. And we are going to be pursuing that as a city to try and give us the ability to hold accountable at a minimum. As I noted earlier, the data is telling us that it's a small number of individuals are responsible for a large number of these quality of life issues. If we can help those individuals be held accountable and get to some better situation, that's going to be our first priority. And if we need to continue to look at other accountability beyond that, we'll see. But we're asking the county to provide more jail beds to the needs that we're seeing, and we're saying we're willing to help you pay for that.
Well, you gave me a lot of information there, so I've got a couple of counterpoints to you. You said that you're glad it's not your job to deal with the LA County and LA City problems, and I agree with you. But it is your job, just on a smaller scale. And it seems like what we're doing is the same thing Los Angeles is doing on a smaller scale. We're not spending billions, but we're spending millions. And you said, yes, there is some accountability there, but you were a little bit ambiguous on that. I heard a lot of for lack of a better term, presentation buzzwords like facilitate and coordinate and working towards and supportive and accountability without anything specific or concrete. So my concern here is that we're handing out money to subsidize what has become an industry. And we can laugh at the terminology, I'm kind of parodying Dwight Eisenhower's military-industrial complex there, but it's the same thing. We create a system of dependency on government grants with no accountability for real results that solve the problem. In fact, the incentive is to remain needed, because that's how you still get the money. So if anybody in this room was told by their employer, you know what, we don't need you anymore, you're no longer going to collect a salary from this organization, we would immediately have a response as to why we are needed and why the organization is so much better off with us. That goes for everybody in this room. And so, and it's not different when you're getting your funding in the form of a grant from the city or from the county or from the state or from the U.S. government. You're explaining why you're needed. I used to work for a nonprofit. In fact, I was a lawyer who represented people who would get evicted. Mr. Rudnick was one of my colleagues.
Oh, I thought he got evicted.
No, he didn't get evicted. He was one of my colleagues. In fact, he taught me just about everything I learned about eviction law. But I spent about 60% of my time at that organization doing grant compliance paperwork so that we could justify why we were getting the money we were getting. It was extremely frustrating. I wanted to just work on my cases, but I had all this compliance paperwork I had to do. Josh is nodding. He had to do the same thing. That's what these organizations have to do to justify why they get the grant money. So my point is, if our goal is to have somebody who's self-sufficient, who no longer needs the assistance of these organizations and no longer needs the assistance of the city. I see somebody who's homeless, and I hope that they can get on their feet and take care of themselves. It's not a pitiless or callous attitude that I'm expressing here. I think it's pitiless and callous to write these people off and say, you know what, you're permanently defective and you need the paternalistic efforts of these nonprofits and the state and federal and county funding to exist. And so because you're somehow the victim of circumstances, we're not going to hold you accountable for anything you do. We're going to give you free food, free housing, free help, everything you need while you continue to go out. Since we're not empowered to, enforce the criminal law because we don't have enough room in the jail, we're just going to continue giving you the carrot without any threat of the stick and without any requirements from you. And so I don't see that as a solution. In fact, all that does is encourage the same behavior over and over again, and we will end up turning into a miniature version of Los Angeles if we let it go. So that's the concern I have here. I don't feel like I've received a satisfying answer. The other part of it, with respect to the salary range, we said, well, these are competitive salaries. We talked about this last week: market value, competitive, affordable. These buzzwords that we use, what does that actually mean? What is competitive? Well, when you create an industry where there are 30 or 40 nonprofits in the city, that creates a demand for people to run the nonprofits. And so now there's a competition between these people to hire the qualified people to run the nonprofits, which escalates or raises the market value for these completely manufactured positions. So I would submit to you that $800,000 or $900,000 a year in Los Angeles probably is market value for an executive director of a nonprofit, which sounds outrageous to anybody on the outside, but calling it market value when we've created this market with a bunch of perverse incentives it doesn't help me. So my point is, I would like to see the city, before they ask the taxpayers, who I don't think voted to create this kind of a situation when they passed the Measure N tax, I would like to see some kind of accountability to the taxpayers and the voters that we're actually getting something permanent and useful out of this money. We're actually restoring people. And it's not just a handful of people. It's actually, we're getting real results. We're transforming people back into productive members of society. So I would like to hear some kind of concrete plan that's not just a bunch of jargon and buzzwords. And I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but at some point, I would like to see that before I vote in favor of calling this proposed expenditure consistent with the Measure N ballot measure.
I appreciate your feedback and viewpoints. I respectfully, I think we'll take some of that as feedback. I feel like I have provided responses that we are managing our contracts. We're holding our folks accountable to their contracts. There's some numbers that are, have been up on the screen today. We've had 349 people placed into permanent supportive housing. Doesn't mean they're 100% self-sufficient, but they're at the last phases of becoming self-sufficient. Those are the outcome-based measures that we're, pointing towards. I think there's a certain level of, again, I think those that have dug deep on this topic, super complicated, not easy solutions, and we, to a degree, we have to be responsive to the community and do as much as we can to address both the impacts of quality of life, and again, continue to help people take that long journey back to becoming self-sufficient. And as I mentioned, we're going to have an action plan that's going to come out of the Homeless Collaborative. But I'll be candid, is that going to be give perfect confidence to everybody in the community that we're on the right path? I don't think so. This is a gnarly issue, but it will show the outcome measures that we're targeting, and that's what we're going to be basically paying people to do, is to achieve and drive towards those outcomes. And respectfully, again, I don't think you're going to see a formal action plan with all those outcomes before this, vote is going to be in front of the committee. There's a level of need to allow the city council and city staff and the many partners work at this issue. And we believe these are some of the biggest return on investment next steps in addressing both homelessness and the impacts of homelessness as we continue to, again, push towards those outcomes.
Can we allow Director Byers to continue with her
just a few more
presentation?
Just a few more.
Exactly. We've gone an hour and a half on I think 2 slides. So
So this slide is really, was also presented to our Housing and Homeless Committee, and it was because City Council is having the same conversations that this committee is having, and that is why affordable housing is so much more than market rate. And so there was a Turner Center study, and I completely agree with the comment that California's rising affordable housing development costs stand in direct opposition to its goals in addressing the housing crisis. So California isn't helping itself. We talked about the prevailing wage in the Central Valley. It increases costs by almost 30%. And this was a study that was done between 2008 and 2019. And that number has probably gone up again because minimum wage has raised as well. And so that's going to have this incremental effect. But the cost per square foot has risen 55% since 2008. There's one item on here that hits home for me, and that's this lack of government staff and capacity slows down approvals, which increases cost. One of City Council's #1 priority is making sure we have a streamlined approach to building permit. And so we are in the process of working on that, having effective timelines. But every contractor will tell you that the longer it takes in the city process, the more it costs them. And they do their costs based off of that day. And so if a permit is stuck in the city for 3 months, then they have to reevaluate all those costs. And so that is something that's being worked on. This slide really isn't to go for the PSVS. It's just informational in what studies are showing why it is so expensive to build. We do have some local examples, and probably not going to make you any happier in how much they cost. So the residences at East Hills, it's 81 units. 44 of those were set aside for veterans. That is constructed per unit. It was about $309,000. But again, you'll see the funding sources. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They had 6 funding sources. And when you start to cobble together that many funding sources, so some of the things they'll do is if it's a federally funded grant, then you have federal prevailing wage. And then if you're also tying in something that is associated with California, you have to do California's prevailing wage. And both of them have different reporting requirements. So what the member Campbell was speaking to, yes, there's a lot of admin to make sure, and especially when you have one housing project that has 2 funding sources, it's federal and state, you identify the units that are federal, you identify the units that are state, and then you have to do the paperwork for both of those. And so it's a very complex system. Compared to Renaissance at Baker, this is currently under construction, and that ended up being $526,000 per unit. Some of that is skewed a little bit because it's a podium style construction, and it has workforce development and retail space on the ground floor. And when you evaluate that in construction costs, that can't be accounted for. It's accounted for in the housing units. So that's just an example of what is happening in our own community. Both of these received some PSVS funding. So typically PSVS funding is first dollar in. We have seen that it typically accounts for about 10% of 5 to 10% of housing costs. But what that does is it provides that seed money that then they're able to get bond proceeds. They're able to get tax credits. They're able to get other things. And so that's why the PSVS for affordable housing construction has been so beneficial. Because of the projects that we have, all of the large ones are receiving some type of PSVS funding, and that has made them eligible for other resources, because you can't go for tax credits unless you have other funding sources. It is a system that is beyond confusing, and we're just here to assist them as best we can. But with that, what have we done? So in 2023, 368 units were completed. 10 of those were first-time home buyer. We had a subdivision that was unable to finish construction. Self-help enterprises went in, purchased 10 lots, and through PSVS funding, were able to construct housing units that then were available for families for purchase. There were 80 units rehabilitated. We have 251 units currently under construction, and 464 in pre-development. And so pre-development, there's possibly more out there, but the 464 are ones that have come to the city, have applied for our funding. But we have leveraged the dollars that have been provided through PSVS. And so last year we leveraged 7.5 million of that. We were able to get funding through the local housing trust fund in the amount of 3 million. But some of the other things that we leverage, and it is alphabet soup, but we have our community development block grant, we have REAP funds and LEAP funds, and those are the SB2 where there was $75 assessed to every property transaction. That's what the LEAP and REAP are. And then we also have permanent local housing allocation, as well as city was most recently awarded $22 million in transformative climate community, and that's going to have additional, I think it's 56 units included in that program. And so we really have tried to be very cognizant of getting more units, understanding what it is our affordable housing developers go through. I spoke just a minute ago about the increase in home ownership, how it's gone up 60% since 2019. I discovered a very disturbing trend to me. When I first started at the city, across the city was almost 60% home ownership and 40% rentals. It was at 59.8. As of this year, it's down to 58.4, which doesn't sound like a lot, like, 1.5%, but you really look citywide, that means that we have less home ownership in our community than we had just a year and a half ago, and it's gone down by 1.5%, and that's pretty substantial. So what are we doing about it? This was also something that was taken to affordable housing or housing and homeless committee. City Council has been very aggressive in how are we going to do something besides these very large housing developments. So the Bakersfield Community Land Trust was formed. We are placing vacant properties into that for development. It is a nonprofit, and we went through Chapter 8 tax default. We're getting 15 properties vacant, residentially zoned, to place in the land trust. That has other funding resources available to it, and those housing units would be in perpetuity. The land trust also has 4 housing models that are in it, and that is home ownership, where the land trust retains ownership of the land and the person buys the home that's on it. So when it sells, it still stays as part of the land trust. Land trusts typically have like apartments, units that are rented, but something that's happening more and more is taking these apartments or these condos or duplexes and doing a condominium land division to where they're available for sale. And so taking people who have been living in their apartments, you know, some people will stay living in an apartment for 10 years and making that unit available for them to purchase. And then the third model is kind of a, I said 4, but there's 3. The third model is like rent, lease to own. And so you will sometimes have people who have lived in an apartment for 10 years, making that available for home ownership through lease to own. And it doesn't necessarily mean dollars, but that's just something that's happening on the sideline and really has gotten kicked up over the last 3 months. And so by next year, I'm hopeful to be able to report some numbers for housing that way. Like I said, we've been going through tax default properties. This was our first venture. And so we are trying new things. We talked about pilot programs for eviction protection. This is also a pilot for the city. And sometimes we don't pivot that quickly, but we really are trying in affordable housing to find other ways. And one of those is tax default. We only went for vacant properties this time. We didn't go for ones that had homes on them. We have a little bit of fear, but we're going to try and be successful in the 15 that we purchased. A deed restriction is placed on that it's made available for affordable housing, and that is something that is required by Kern County when we do this. We are looking more and more, instead of these large scale, into the duplex, triplex model. They tend to build quicker, they tend to build cheaper, and doing some infill development. And that's really why we're looking at these tax default residential properties. Can we put a couple duplex, triplex on them? Do land divisions and then sell those. We're just looking at what those options might be. Another one is we're working with churches or places of worship. sometimes they have very large properties, and having housing available for them. My parents actually lived at Manor, Calvary Manor. I don't even remember what it was called. Anyways, and that's a very large church out on Manor that has housing for their senior members. And so maybe finding a way to work with our places of worship that they can also assist with the number of units that are needed. And then we're purchasing and rehabilitating existing properties. We want to promote more and more ADU development. We had, now I wish I knew the number. I think we had 130 accessory dwelling units constructed last year. It's possibly more than that. And having some grant opportunities. Those go on existing single-family residential. It can provide wealth building for the property owner, but also provide safe housing in a small setting. And that's why we're promoting accessory dwelling units. And then when I talk about building relationships and sharing resources and accessing alternative funding, we haven't really had a relationship with the Kern Home Builders Association that we're trying to build. I think we have developers. We have, I can't think of his name. He's been a long time builder, but every year he builds for the Children's Hospital and donates it. And so, who is it? Can't think. Anyways, wonderful local developer who does for the community a home every year to donate for the Children's Hospital. And so building relationships with our local developer, sharing resources. There is, we have 3 community development financial institutions, and we have very little conversations with them. And then even when we were drafting the eviction protection program, Cal State Bakersfield did a session on it. And it's like, we didn't even have that relationship. And so we are looking at ways to kind of share these resources and have a greater impact through some of these programs. So that's how we're kind of changing our model in affordable housing and not just looking at this very large development, but segmenting out, looking at ways at increasing, and that is our goals for this year. And so once again, a request, even though it's a reduction in the affordable housing program, we are still requesting $3 million this year. The emergency shelter for 500 more beds, 1.5, and then Open Door Network, their shelter construction. Even this 2.5 million, how much is the construction of the 41 million. And so it is a small portion, but it does make them eligible for those other resources by having some seed funding. They do have an earmark from the federal government. So at the very least, they have to do federal prevailing wage. I mean, it's just not a system that is friendly to affordable housing, but we're going to keep pushing on it. And so we do request 2.5 for Open Door Network.
All right.
Walk away.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe get away now while you can. Any questions? Committee Member Prince.
Just one quick. In regards to the 2.5 million for the Open Door Network, I know you mentioned the need for the possibility of a $41 million project. Now, are these funds based on the fact that they will receive the entire amount of funds that will allow them to complete that project? And if for any reason they are unable to be successful in that endeavor, what happens to the 2.5 million?
So what typically occurs, for example, there was a housing project that we had tentatively awarded, and until it goes to council, it is a tentative award, that was evaluating a site and their development and determined it was infeasible. And so that will go back into the pool, but I assume that would happen if they don't get to a point, and I think it would be a true shame if they were unable to get to the 41 million to construct this resource. It would roll back into the city account. And so we aren't giving a check for 2.5 million. It's at the time that they're ready to start their construction.
Committee Member Mound.
On some of these programs you spoke about, is there any requirement or I guess you can't require anyone to do anything anymore, but on employment, because interesting thing, I have a couple of kids that work for me. They're like 22 to 24, and in Shafter, I don't know the program, but they have to go and do so many hours of building their own house and so I don't know what the program is, but I was just thinking, I see 10,000 new residents in downtown. Hopefully those are Kern County residents and not people moving in, but is there any housing someone and not expecting them or wanting them to join the job force? Does that make any sense? It's
It
kind
does.
of a question, and
It depends on the type of housing, and so, or the type of voucher
well, I
that's
meant the
associated
programs
with
where
it.
they could have ownership,
Yeah.
not just, the free housing. And
So the sweat equity model
well,
is typically
a
what
little
it's
both, I
called.
guess.
Habitat for Humanity is a sweat equity model where you become eligible for the home, you assist in the construction of it, and the great thing about that is then you also learn how to maintain your home because you helped construct it. We do have some programs. Frequently, I have had some backlash for housing that is set aside for like farm labor housing, despite the fact that the majority of jobs in Kern County are agriculturally based and tend to be the lowest pay. We have constructed, I think, 126 units over the past year for farm labor housing, and that is job requirement. The way you gain entry is because you have a job, and that's how that one works. So it just kind of depends on the model. Frequently, if you're going to receive federal funding for shelter, it is, can't think of I'm still getting back into homeless services, so I'm sorry, I can't think of all the terms that we frequently use, but it is a low barrier model. And so it's come as you are. And then you start to work on goals. And that's what case management is about. Case management is about reaching certain goals, getting your paperwork. Frequently, homeless people no longer have their driver's license, don't have a birth certificate, don't have any of that documentation that would be required in order to get a job. And so those are some of the goals that are set. But it just depends on the type of housing model.
Committee Member Coleman.
Yeah, I'm just going to change the tempo a little bit. This is just a matter of disclosure. Just for be clear, transparent. I did have a conversation with Sandra Placenta from Leadership Council regarding the rent, I don't know what
EPP.
they call it, proposal that they have. And I also spoke to, and unfortunately, I don't remember the director's name at the Open Door Network. I just draw a blank, but I did chat with her regarding their request as well. I always make myself available to anybody from the public that wants to talk about any issues. We did discuss those. We didn't reach any kind of accord. So I just needed to disclose that. So thank you.
And I would follow up with the same. I had a brief conversation with both individuals, so.
Yeah, go for it. Vice Chair Campbell.
I think we're on the same page, but the 10,000 people that you're looking to relocate downtown, that's not 10,000 homeless people. You're just hoping that
No.
we increase the population of downtown by 10.
Oh, sorry. There was a document done a couple years ago about making downtown Bakersfield. It was in line with the high-speed rail in that it identified finding 10,000 new residents, not 10,000 new homes.
That's what I thought,
So,
but-
yeah, the study was about, do we have that capacity? Do we have the land is more what it was about than, that's.
Yeah. I mean, since I've lived in Bakersfield for the last 20 years, downtown has improved significantly. So it's good to see.
It was a document from High Speed Rail. Thank you.
And then I would just, chime in. This is more of a comment than a question. No response is really needed. But as we, look at making investments, especially capital investments and projects, I think we need to be anticipating and even thinking about, future years about the operating component of it. Because if you are investing in the capital of it, then I think there's going to be an expectation by the recipient that there's going to be some skin in the game down the road around operating. So just something to think about as you think of these capital investments. Any other questions? All right. I think you've earned the right to sit down, Ms. Myers. Thank you. Do we want to take a quick break? Do we have lunch available for the committee?
I have to admit, that was my assumption, but I haven't confirmed that personally. But that was our assumption, going into today.
Yeah.
Just from a time check standpoint, I think our Public Works presentation is a number of slides that could be done in 15 minutes.
Okay.
The Q&A on that I can't vouch for. But I think I expect that'll probably be at least an hour, conversation there.
Okay.
Just depending on some of the Q&A, but just to keep that in mind to allow us some time to do deliberations before the end of our session on the other items.
Yep, definitely. So should we take Mr. Strakalous now and then break?
I think Mr. Strakalous is willing to go now.
Colleagues?
And that might allow us to actually push through that piece and make sure then we take a break and then come back for the deliberations. I think we probably could do that.
Let's do that.
Good morning, Chairman Ortiz, honorable committee members. It's good to see you again. It's been about a year. It's been a busy year for Public Works for sure. Before I get started with the presentation, which will be short, I just wanted to introduce a few folks from staff. We have our assistant directors, Zach Meyer and Luis Topete here to my right. We also have our operations manager, Kevin Peoples, and our streets and utilities superintendent, Chris Mudrick. We have our engineering managers, Paul Archer and Navdeep Grewal. And we have our two analysts in the back, April and Roel. Also, we have our fiscal services and administrative services manager in the back. We have Cesar Luna here. So with that, kick off the presentation. I don't know if I saw the clicker. Okay, 4 quick points. Priorities and goals, the 23-24 highlights, and then getting into some of the proposed fiscal year 24-25 projects and questions and comments. Public Works projects check the box for several of the PSVS priorities and City Council goals. While we're not police officers, the Public Works staff and the frontline staff all work together to design, build, and maintain infrastructure within public spaces. And Measure N has enabled the Public Works Department to build and rebuild important safety infrastructure in all areas of the city, in all areas of need, all to improve the quality of life for residents and visitors. We'll review some of these projects and programs in the next few slides. I do want to assure you, though, that the projects delivered by the Public Works Department are safe, reliable, and sustainable. And we believe that the city's public involvement process for many of these projects enhances community character. And each of the projects, while there are many new technologies that you'll see in some of the upcoming slides and some new and interesting design approaches for public rights of way, Public Works Department carefully and innovatively considers each on a site-specific basis, context-sensitive design solutions. So the next 3 slides are dedicated to looking at some of the highlights of some of the PSVS allocations for programs. First, I'll start out with our graffiti abatement program. It's one of the state's best abatement programs based on the quantity of service requests and the quickness of removing that graffiti. This is thanks to the hard work of the General Services Division and specifically Mr. Juan Ambriz's team in the graffiti abatement. We also have contractors who help assist in that program, but we wouldn't be as successful as we are without the support of PSVS Measure N. Street lighting, you'll see a slide here in the upper right. This multi-year project started a few years back, and it started specifically with transforming some of our high-pressure sodium lights to LED lights, much more cost-efficient, energy-efficient, and lesser cost to operate. We then transitioned to several intersections throughout the city that we noted had safety issues because of poor lighting. So we increased the lighting at those specific intersections. This year, we have installed 165 new streetlights that are either built or under construction now, representing 5 different neighborhoods in the city. And in design, we have an additional 71 new streetlights for an additional 3 neighborhoods within the city. There are several other neighborhood areas that we've identified on a priority list. So this multi-year program continues into the future for several years, and it will rely on additional PSVS support in those years to continue. Let me see. So the next one is disadvantaged neighborhood alley and street repairs and resurfacing. So the best way to quantify this effort is we have a mapping portal that is available to the public, and it identifies streets that have been resurfaced, alleys that have been rehabbed and resurfaced, and the mapping portal shows those streets, and the intent of that is to establish a moratorium so utility companies do not dig into those streets for a 5-year period of time. That map is filling up quickly thanks to the work of the Streets and Utilities Division of Public Works. And I'll get more into some of the street resurfacing a little bit later. Additional highlights, we do have a multimodal demonstration capital improvement programs that's supported by PSVS funding. The picture on the right is the most recent effort to install traffic calming measures along Niles, 2 blocks of Niles and Monterey Street. This is a quick build strategy. It uses things like rubberized curb and portable planters that are locked in place. It enables us to do something now and demonstrate a project and learn from that project, because Niles and Monterey are under design for a much broader long-term permanent project. And we're going to take the information that we get from this. You'll notice that Niles and Monterey, 2 one-way pairs, 3 lanes each direction. The traffic volumes are low on both of those roads. They don't warrant the 3 lanes in each direction. So we put 2 blocks here on a road diet, is what we call. And by the fact that it's a demonstration project, we're able to test the road diet before making permanent judgments on a road diet. We also have traffic calming allocation as a CIP. And what we've done there is we've adopted a neighborhood traffic calming program. And part of that program establishes a 2-level approach. Tier 1 level is quick implementation things that we can do with pavement markings, signage, police enforcement details. And then the Tier 2 approaches are more geometrical changes to the right-of-way that force a calming effect. The most common one that you might have seen out there are speed humps or speed tables that are placed in the roadway. Others, though, might include intersection or curb, intersection bulb outs, curb extensions at intersections. That's another approach. Chicanes are another one. A neighborhood, as you come off of an arterial and you turn into a neighborhood, some of the approaches there could be a landscaped entry island to really communicate to the driver that you're entering into a residential neighborhood. You got to slow down. It's a different feel to the street. Additional updates. It's the last slide on updates. The picture in the upper right is a highway beautification effort at Hosking Interchange with the 99. The city designed a project to elevate the aesthetic appeal to the design effort for the Caltrans project. And Caltrans did take that design as part of their construction project and incorporated it into the outcome which you see there. So it's a combination of a little bit more hardscape in terms of rock and decomposed granite, some plantings, but still some mulch as well. I think we've learned some things from this project that we'll kind of transition to on future projects. beautification projects along the freeway corridor. Another project that received PSVS allocation was the City of Bakersfield Animal Care Center. This is a multi-year phasing plan. Phase 1 was to build a wall and fencing, a gate around the perimeter. We've achieved that. That is the photo in the lower left. And another one is traffic signal battery backup systems. There's nothing worse than coming upon an intersection at night when PG&E's power has failed, and you've got to deal with a situation like that and hope other drivers are dealing with it in a responsible way. So what we want to do, and what we are doing, is we are currently out to bid for battery backup systems at 20 intersections, another multi-year approach because we have 400 plus intersections to tackle, to install battery backup devices. So when the power does fail, there's no interruption to the signal operation, and more importantly, no interruption to the signal timing pattern. It doesn't go into a flash, it continues running the timing pattern. All right, so next slide. Proposed projects going into 24-25, a total request of $6.95 million. And I'll go through the list as we move through the slides. Street resurfacing, $2.5 million. Annually, we do over $20 million of street rehab and resurfacing. It's actually quite an effort for any municipality to achieve that much. We do have 150 square miles to cover, though. So it really is acknowledgement of the efforts of the Public Works design team and the streets maintenance team. For street resurfacing this year, we are requesting $2.5 million to help support this program. In terms of looking at the last 4 years of what prices have done for the cost of asphalt, the cost of trucking, we're looking at about 40% increases in materials and trucking costs over the last 4 years. We're trying to cope with that, but still maintain a level of service and an output for the city, citywide. Moving down to streetlight improvements. Again, I talked about that earlier. It's a multi-year program. We have about a dozen more neighborhoods that we would like to get to. And streetlight improvements, we're requesting $1 million for this project. So State Road 58 and State Road 99, beautification phase 1. We are working with a consultant currently to design beautification improvements, which are both hardscape and landscaping, to the interchange of 99 and 58. We realize that there's more construction work to do there, right? So this phased approach is really a good opportunity to help us work with Caltrans and to demonstrate for phase 1 what we can do along the 58 and hopefully transcend additional improvements at all 4 quadrants, the remaining 3 quadrants of the interchange, as part of those construction projects that are pending for the interchange. And that's the 7th movement and the 8th movement at that interchange. The city will be doing the construction of the 7th movement, and Caltrans has committed to doing the construction of the 8th movement. And we're hoping to wrap up the remaining beautification into the 8th movement approach. Median improvements. So we have a plan to improve medians citywide. I've identified 4 here. There are additional 2, one on Weibel and one on Ash. We do try to acquire grant funding to help support many of these projects. And in the case of median improvements, we have included or obtained $807,000 in grants to help us facilitate some of this. So our request is for a $750,000 allocation to help support further median improvements throughout the city. Lastly, 18th and 19th Street improvements. These are complete street improvements that are under design now. The extent is from F Street all the way to Mill Creek, but our phase 1 effort is a limited 3-block area, which is valued at about $6 million. We have acquired CMAQ, or Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Grant funding to help support this project. We are asking for an additional $500,000 to support this particular Phase 1 Complete Street project. So with that, that concludes the request by Public Works, and the team remains available for questions.
Quick question for you, Mr. Strakalus, and thank you for your brevity in your presentation. On street resurfacing, the $2.5 million, is that like basically grappling with the cost increases, or does that result in additional pavement getting repaved?
Yeah, it's likely going to keep things even.
Committee Member Coleman?
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. Mr. Strakalus, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. I just want to clarify, we're being asked for $6.9 million. This is in addition to general funds that are being applied. This is only the amounts that are coming out of Measure N, correct?
That's correct.
And so my concern always is that the Measure N money is intended for certain types of expenses, very clearly spelled out. But I'm always concerned that the council, when they do their budget, will spend their money on stuff that's not necessarily here and push more of that to PSVS funds. And I don't know if you can talk about it, or if the city manager needs to talk about it, about whether we're getting money pushed to us because the city is choosing to spend their money elsewhere.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thanks, committee member. So the general fund, prior to PSVS and still post PSVS, has really no room for additional things, and so we're not recommending new things into the general fund. There's the Development Services Fund that also receives some general fund money that we think we may add one, planner this year that to help again with the speed of our permitting processes. But there aren't other asks being put into the general fund because there's no funding available to do those. I would reflect, though, we also have some other funding sources. We have a utility surcharge tax. We have the SB1 monies. Those are for streets. We have the gas tax. We're putting those all back into streets the same way we have always. We're not changing that paradigm. We're just continuing to put the money into those streets. We also have a transient occupancy tax that helps to fund our Visit Bakersfield tourism unit, but then those funds come into our capital, basically our CIP program that we do every year is funded by our transient occupancy tax. And so there's a mix of projects that we try to address through that fund. Often it's, if a city, these are the typical types of capital projects you would see a city do. If the useful life of a roof on the, for example, a fire station is one of those that's going to be proposed this year. This allows us to continue to just do those regular capital improvement projects that you need to do on a regular basis. And we put some of those funds also into streets, actually, by the way. Our capital outlay fund looks pretty similar to what it has looked in prior years. Unfortunately, again, costs are increasing there more than revenues, and so we're just doing less projects, kind of like on the PSVS side. But there aren't projects that would basically qualify under the general fund that we've put into PSVS that otherwise we're funding the other new things in general fund because we're just not adding anything in the general fund.
Thank you. Mr. Strakalus, you kind of jumped over, you went through line by line the 7 items, and you hit on the State Route 58 and 99 beautification, and then you jumped to the median improvements for $750,000 on Camino Media, Panama, the other 4 or 2. But you didn't really, maybe I wasn't paying attention, the multimodal demonstration projects. What is that specifically?
I apologize.
Is that the Nile
for that.
Street stuff, or what is that?
It's a continuation of some of the traffic calming efforts and neighborhood traffic calming efforts. So yes, it would be a continuation of the things that you would have seen on Niles Monterey, and also some of the speed humps and geometric improvements to help calm traffic.
You and I had a conversation recently about the Nile Street traffic calming things, and you shared that that was temporary in nature, in that it was for testing purposes. But we also talked about some of those traffic calming measures were make drivers do something that's counterintuitive. And so my question is, what are you doing to make sure that these improvements fit with how people behave on the roadways?
Well, when the improvements are implemented, we're doing a lot of coordination before they're put in place with the police department for enforcement. For example, parking along Niles and Monterey, we completely moved it off the curb line. So during construction, we allowed parking to remain along the curb line just while we were getting the project done. But at the conclusion of the project, we coordinated with the police department. We went door to door with to talk to residents about the change in the parking and why we were doing that. In that case, we have a multifaceted approach to work with PD to go door to door, get the public involvement effort strong there. Other than that, signage and the markings, and it's up to the driver to do the rest.
My last question has to do with the 18th and 19th Street improvements. And I think we've talked about this before, is that there was improvements already on 18th and 19th Street that were done as part of the Mill Creek project many years ago that were just not maintained by the city, and they've become dilapidated. I think some of them have been removed by this point, planters and that kind of stuff down in that corridor. So what are you going to do to maintain these improvements?
Sure. Well, a couple of years ago, we went through an effort to spruce up the downtown, which means take some of that unmaintained infrastructure and bring it up to standards, a working level of service. We did that with bollards, lighted bollards. We did that with resurfacing. We did that with some of the planters along Q Street. We continue to do that to this day. As a matter of fact, most recently we're working on planters on I Street and H, I believe, some of the dated planters there, and replacing them with some curb and gutter, maybe some decorative brick as well. So there is a transition that's going on that we're trying to keep up with as we move forward from year to year.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Committee Member Abernethy.
Okay, 19th Street. To get from Oak, you drive Oak all the way to B to get to Rice Bowl and all these places. It's a horrible, horrible, beat-up road for years, and that's the entrance to our downtown. So, I don't know, you're going here, but all the residents that live there, besides it being entry street, I mean, have you folks driven down 19th between Oak and B?
And we've talked about it recently as well. There are some significant challenges related to that, and there's opportunities as well. The opportunities are to calm traffic, to implement some of the concepts we're talking about today, but also the challenges are mainly with the American Disabilities Act laws, where we have to bring it up to an ADA standard. So we've got to take a look at every sidewalk intersection, the curb ramps. We've got to take a look at bringing it up to a compliance level before we can actually resurface or do a resurfacing project. And that's the same for not just 19th, but a lot of the streets there in Westchester.
Yeah, I'm talking Oak, though, to B. I'm talking about from Oak Street to B on 19th. Street. I mean, as you're regular repairing of roads, it seems like somebody should be taking care of that. I mean, it's really, really bad shape. I wish you folks would drive it. I don't live there. I just drive it to go to downtown. And how can it get that bad in a 21st century city? It looks horrible. Besides, it drives horrible. So I wonder. We're looking at all this pretty paint and all that, but ultimately, residents are driving on their vehicles on these roads, and it's not So I find that, I would say, why isn't the money that's spent for roads spent on enhancing and improving the roads that currently exist before they turn into just rot? I mean, probably every 12 inches is a bump and a break in the pavement.
And we do have budget available to us to maintain roadways. We have a pothole filling team. We do patch repairs as well. It is 150 square miles to cover. So sometimes there are areas that holes to fill that we need to get to, and we'll certainly take a look at that particular street.
Okay, these medians, there's a picture you have here. Is the goal, what are you going to do to medians?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ideas and concepts. I think one of the most recent ones is on Rosedale Avenue, where there's more of, I'll call it a hardscape beautification treatment there, where we're relying less on plants, less water to use in those medians, a little bit more decomposed granite and hardscape paving. So I think the trend is to move in that direction, but not necessarily abandon landscaping altogether.
Okay, but are you trying to build medians? Or, because I'll
Correct.
bring up again California and Mohawk. That median is about this wide. There's no reason except the people that stand there asking for money, and either they or I are going to get hit here at some point. And so I don't want to encourage people to stand in the median. So I hope you're not building wider medians, because that's dangerous.
Yeah, you're right. This median approach would be for new medians. And in terms of the safety component for those medians, whenever you place one, you're limiting a driver's opportunity to cross over, and you're controlling where they're taking left turns through channelized median openings. So the safety component is more associated with the traffic movement, and that's where the median construction comes in. And that's one of the reasons we got the grant to do this.
Well, I don't see it being addressed, the issue that I think is incredibly serious, that these homeless people are standing on the medians with 6 lanes of cars on each side. Some of them have a bike, and you folks, nobody arrests them, and someone's going to get really hurt, the driver or the person. And so I would put spikes, something to keep them off of the median, and then I feel like you're going to build nice places for them to relax on the median with all this traffic.
No. Actually, one of the things we did in recent months was to put a sign up to, prohibit any standing within those median noses. I think we can design median noses with things like river rocks, so you can't really stand on it without losing your balance. There are things we can do to try and design so that people aren't standing there, and we'll certainly do that.
Well, anyway, if you see the folks there, you wouldn't want them wobbling. That to me makes it worse. They're going to be wobbling into the
Well, the sign
lane.
says they shouldn't be there.
Okay, and then is the street, these improvements, a lot of things I see east of 99. How about the part of the city west of 99? Are we balancing repairs and enhancements and all these things for both sides of 99 in terms of where the people in the city live?
Yes, I believe so.
You believe so?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I see a lot of projects, but they're really focused on downtown, and the city goes a lot farther than that. So.
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one that I can think of to apply some balance to it would be some of the resurfacing projects we've done on Stockdale Highway in 2 segments there. We've done a resurfacing project on Manor. Anybody want to help me out with Panama Lane?
Let me just jump in real quick, Greg, because don't forget again, there's $20 million other dollars from other funding sources that are going into projects throughout the city. We've got Panama Lane, we've got Old River Road, South Buena Vista going this year, and there'll be other like projects next year. And just as a reminder, the way that we select roadways for repairs is based off of a very specific analytics of those roadways. We have a pavement condition index where we have firms that are expert in doing this, and they do it in cities throughout the nation, where they go and they will take both technology to assess the condition of the roadway, as well as they will send individuals to go and assess. And so every street in the city gets a score of what the pavement condition is. And one of the things that we have to be careful about is if we only ever chase the worst roads, then that means our roads that are in fair condition or good condition to deteriorate faster, and you can actually never catch up by just repairing old roads, because you need to also maintain yours that are in fair condition. And historically, the city of Bakersfield has not put enough money into maintaining those in fair and good condition to extend their life. But we've, in the last 4 years, we've put more monies into our paving to allow us to keep up and maintain and extend the life. And we've actually, thanks to some good work by our staff, we've introduced some new techniques and technologies that we're using in the ways that we do repavings and extending the life of our streets. And so we're trying to catch up and raise our citywide condition score by making sure that we, again, extend the life of those roads that are in fair and good condition, as well as go and rehab those that are in poorest condition. But it's based off of very objective standards, and that we spread the work throughout the city based on those that are poor, as well as fair, as well as good condition, so that we're getting at all of our streets across the city, but done again in an objective way, because we hear all the time that my street needs it the most, but we look at then those pavement scores and see which really ones do need it the most.
And finally, this traffic calming, okay, I think the best way to calm traffic is a cop giving out a $350 ticket, because this traffic calming is putting my 4,000-pound car next to a 20-pound bike, closer than it was. And this morning, because you repaved Brimhall, which, thank goodness, Bruce Freeman, that when I'm driving there, those gardeners pull in their vehicle, or any truck, their trailer, he's so wide that he's coming over onto the lane, so I'm scooting over to the right because you made the lane so narrow so that the biker can have a big lane. I don't believe in it. I think it's the worst thing possible, is this word traffic smoothing, because putting us closer together to bike lanes and making it narrower when these trucks that go through town, and who have every right. I don't want to hurt their business either, but you got to look at that. Is the government, federal government, making you smooth these lanes?
I think it's more the statistics about pedestrian and bicycle fatalities, and some of the concerns we've heard from the community about wanting to get out, not just in a car, but on a bike and walk and feel more comfortable doing it. I think it starts there. In terms of bike lanes and the proximity to the travel lane, we are trying to buffer these lanes so that there's space in between, so drivers do feel more comfortable moving in their lane, and then there's adequate safety space, then the bicycle lane after that. Lot of different. Will say that it is a trend throughout the country, and a lot of these grant opportunities focus in on what communities do or do not do in order to award their grants. We have been successful in receiving many grants, and I think in part because of how we've responded to tackling the pedestrian and bicycle and multimodal opportunity issue.
Vice Chair Campbell.
With respect to the 99 and 58 beautification project, have you given any thought to postponing that until after the Supreme Court rules on that grants pass case? Or are you planning to make potentially a beautiful place for people to put their tents?
I wasn't aware of the case itself applying to this beautification project, so I didn't consider that. In terms of the beautification approach, as part of the TRIP program and project, we're compelled to do some sort of level of effort to beautify that interchange in the areas that we've disturbed. So I think to a certain degree we're committed to doing some level of effort. Beyond that, we're hoping Caltrans takes care of the rest.
That's all I have. Thank you.
And then on medians, just one follow-up question. I mean, is the goal there to harden it so that we're using less of the resource of the Parks and Rec Department to be maintaining and mowing medians?
I think it is. And we work in collaboration with Recreation and Parks Department staff and Mr. Anthony, and we've talked about those approaches and how they play out in terms of maintenance.
Any other questions from my colleagues? Oh, Mr. Prince.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Actually, a few things that I was going to mention. Ms. Abernathy did a great job in mentioning those things, but I just have a couple quick questions. You mentioned earlier in regards to street lighting and what you've accomplished in that area, and you said in 5 different neighborhoods. And my question is, what constitutes a neighborhood based upon your determination?
Yeah, it's proximity to a street, really, because the way we design for the street lights is in a corridor approach, and the homes that are adjacent to that street. And neighborhood is probably a little bit too broad of a term. It's more of a street corridor improvement. But if several folks travel that corridor, there's benefit to the neighborhood.
Okay. Then I've been on this committee now for 5 years, and part of what I initiated some of my conversations has been the importance of street lighting and how that plays a role in safety and security in a lot of our neighborhoods as well. I do know that we've spent a lot of money over the periods of this time frame in regards to studies. And my question would be, have these studies been concluded? And if so, has this committee been presented with the results of the studies in regards to where lighting should be placed? Because I know a lot of money was spent in that regards.
Yeah, there was a study that was done a few years back that focused in on the transition to LED, and then it picked out several intersections that had safety issues. We've concluded the implementation phase of the street lights as it addresses the conversion and the intersections, and now we're working into the neighborhoods. I don't recall a list. We do have a list of priority corridors. I don't recall the connection between that and the report, although there may be. That was just as I got here at the city. In terms of the streetlight corridors, we have got about a dozen more corridors that are listed on our priority list. So the studies are over, and it's more of the design and implementation.
And let me jump in there, Greg, because your memory is good, Committee Member Prince.
Sometimes.
No, it's good. So we had spent about $100,000 to do an initial study to identify some of the areas that had like the biggest gaps. Where was the lighting sort of most problematic, missing the most? And that first phase, as Mr. Strackos had pointed out, identified 56 intersections that had the biggest gaps in lighting. And so I don't know honestly whether we provided that specific study result to this committee, but the first $1 million allocation of the PSVS funding went towards funding those 56 intersections based off of that study that was also funded out of PSVS, about $100,000. We had talked about allocating additional funding to go and create essentially like a map of the whole city, where would we recommend every street light. We didn't ultimately move forward with that study. We actually have a technology tool with GIS mapping, geospatial mapping, that allows us to identify where all of our streetlights are, as well as identify places where we'd like to put streetlights. And so we're handling that a little bit more in-house over time to really identify where we're going to put streetlights. But what we have been doing is noting both off of sometimes it's specific incidents or issues that come up, or requests from these neighborhoods or communities, or requests from our council members. We have been identifying additional areas where we're going to go and proactively put streetlights in, because I think the spirit of what we heard from this committee early on was we want to go to streets and neighborhoods that don't have enough street lighting and put that street lighting in. That is still our mission. That is still what we're doing, and we're addressing that. We frankly, we have a longer list to do right now than we have funding, and so each year we take that $1 million allocation and we work through that list of neighborhoods that have been identified that need more lighting. And so that's why in this last year, again, we had those 5 street corridors that we went through and did. but we don't necessarily have a map that says, here's where we're going to put every streetlight citywide, but we're starting to build that in our GIS system.
Okay, thank you. You also mentioned you have a pothole filling team within the city. Is there anything available for the community to be able to go online when they have a need or a request in order to have that pothole filled?
Absolutely. The easiest way to do it is the Bakersfield City app. Take a picture, type in the location, and we'll receive that, we'll process that, and we'll get right out to fill that pothole. Other than that, phone number at Public Works, 326-3111.
Okay. And also, I lived in other communities, other cities, that for a bicyclist, and this goes along with Mrs. Abernathy's question in regards to the bicyclist and the actual roadway and the importance of it. And in these communities, they set aside the roadways or an area for bicyclists due to the fact that they had a lot of commuting bicyclists who are using these lanes in order to commute, say, back and forth to work or in the downtown areas, not out in the suburbs. Usually they had bicycle paths or areas that bicyclists could ride safely. What's the purpose of extending these bicycle paths so far outside of the main core of the downtown area?
Yeah, well, I'll start with our Complete Streets policy and resolution. The city of Bakersfield has both a policy and an ordinance that speaks to the fact that complete streets are an important part of building the built environment. In terms of routing bicyclists from the downtown, of course, the Kern River Bikeway Pathway Trail is critically important because it's an off-road system, and we're trying to expand that through various ways to allow for more opportunity to use that off-road type of approach. But really, we still have bicyclists using the arterials and the collector roads. They're used frequently by bicyclists. I would say in terms of facilitating that, our standards provide for both travel lanes and bicycle lanes and sidewalks for that matter. So in trying to achieve the standard to provide access to all, we're trying to take a look at the balance for lane size, buffer size, sidewalk size, and bike lane size.
Committee Member Maitland.
Hi, I have a question I brought up last year in regards to the amount of rework on the same, we have a lot of places, relatively newer roads and failures and potholes in those. And my question last year was in the amount of rework. So, I mean, from what little I know enough, it's either quality of product or prep. But it seems around areas that I frequent that the same holes reappear on relatively, roads that are a couple years old. And it's just, do you have a category for rework?
It's part of the maintenance program.
Yeah.
Filling potholes and patchwork, yes. And
but
you're
as
right.
far as, reworking the same
Yeah,
site.
that's absolutely true. Once a road deteriorates, it tends to deteriorate again in that location and maybe worse the next time around.
But they're relatively new roads, though.
Well,
and well, I'm just trying to figure out, because there's crews just redoing the same potholes from what I've seen.
Well, sometimes you'll have a
just
utility.
as far as a rework policy, come up, with a better solution of let's fix it once the right way, instead of just patching and repatching.
Well, yes, and depending upon when that road will be resurfaced, in our resurfacing program. We may continue to fill that pothole until it comes up for resurfacing. I will say that there are a lot of activities that occur within the right-of-way and not all that Public Works controls, like utilities. And from time to time, they'll go out and either patch their damages and their potholes, or we'll tell them to go out to do that, or they'll just be working on their utility by cutting into the street and creating a future patch.
Those aren't those type of what I'm talking about. But I think consistently around town, and I'm talking about relatively new roads that have been done, it just seems the rework is excessive.
We ensure that the projects that we work on with contractors have a 1-year warranty. So if anything happens within that first year, they're on the hook to make it right. Outside of that 1 year, then it lands on the city. That's the best insurance policy we've got thus far. I will say that the quality of work that we design is generally Caltrans standards, right? The top of the line standards for making our contractors do the work.
That's not very high. Sorry.
Sometimes they're too high.
Well, I mean the quality work. I mean, the roads we have
Understood.
in California have always been an issue, and we've rebuilt road after road after road with failure after failure after failure. So
Yeah.
my question last year was, the percentage of rework and a solution to not fix it 15 times, fix it once.
And we don't want to be back out there either. We want to just fix it once and be done with it. But there are different products that can be used to help get more longevity out of the repair. I think we're doing the best. Unless you want to add something, Kevin.
I would just like to know what if you could be more specific on the location. So typically,
Well, I'll get with you after that, but I can, yeah.
see a new road, if you want to talk about roads and stuff like that, typically, they're switching over to a rubberized asphalt cap, which didn't like Caltrans, but, so if I won't use Caltrans, I'll use Las Vegas. So we're switching over a mixed design, which is more kind of gearing to Las Vegas style, which is rubberized.
If you could approach the podium, sorry. It would just be easier to hear, then you'd have to shout. I'm sorry. You get to enjoy the same joy of standing at the podium.
There you
for a long time.
go.
Everybody tells me I'm
There you
loud
go.
enough, I don't need this. This will be a first that I've ever been to one of these.
Well,
in my
I mean, what I'm saying, we
Yeah.
all drive the same
No,
roads.
it's-
Our quality of roads is, it's going to come back to product and prep and not what you guys do.
100% agree with you. So asphalt roads are living and breathing. So it's a flexible pavement. A pavement's always moving. So if we're patching it, like you're saying, multiple times, it depends on what the underlying issue is. So I really hope we're not patching it as much as you're kind of leading to believe. If it is the case, I'd love to hear where they are, 326-3111. Call us, which any of them will get to the bottom of why that's happening. But typically, an asphalt road, depending on what it was, if it was a full reconstruct, you're still dealing with the cap. The cap of the asphalt is typically, I'm going to say, depending on the load, if it's an arterial collector or residential, you have a lifespan on that capacity based on load and environmental effects and everything else. So residentials are going to last a lot longer than a collector versus an arterial. So we're switching most of our, if Navdeep everyone hears, we're going to a rubberized cap on all of our products as far as what goes to the CIP project, which should last about, I'm going to say 50% longer than conventional asphalt. So as far as methodology, yes, we are catching up. As Christian alluded to, we maybe weren't doing the best practices years ago, but we are catching up to the times. So that part is happening. As far as patching, you might see relatively a few patches in the same spot if we have a frequency, but then that goes into basically an Excel spreadsheet, and then we visit the spreadsheet with the PCI.
But you're going to have your rework.
Yeah, you're going to have a
list.
rework. We're going to have
So,
some of it, but
I can get with you later
Yeah.
and then, let you know.
yeah, but
But, we don't have a weather factor. No,
Well, we
no
have
rain,
hot and
no
cold
snow.
shrinkage in asphalt, so you have asphalt that loses mass by oxidation. So basically, once it oxidizes, it's losing mass. So you'll see thermal cracking. It's based on the asphalt actually losing its body mass. A lot of asphalt is shrinking.
I've tried that. It doesn't work.
Well, I stay out in the sun. It hadn't worked for me either. But I'm great. I bet you anything I'd be
I've
great in
tried
a
it.
hurricane.
Doesn't work.
So,
Just like the roads.
yeah.
A couple quick just takeaways and summarization.
But anyway, I'll get with you and show them to you, but it's it's a serious issue.
No, yeah,
when
I
you
think-
see roads around different states,
I do think,
even with weather factors, seem to hold up better.
yeah, I think it would be great to do some follow-up and, look at some specific areas, some specific examples. I think a key takeaway on the topic of streets that I would suggest that I have taken as a professional in, municipal operations. I have a level of confidence because I've worked with lots of different, folks in this space that, as was evident, I think, in getting into some of the technicalities of, asphalts, we have good, smart folks that are watching the best practices available to us today. We've actually, like I mentioned, we've updated some of the ways that we treat our roads to do newer, better things and get smarter and better at how we do it. I would totally agree. We spend tons of time and money fixing roads. It's largely the nature of roads and often the nature of the history of some of those specific roads and what's, what we're dealing with. But we have good, smart folks that are working hard to make sure we're doing quality work and using our tax dollars
Well,
the
my
best that
point
we
wasn't
can. No, yeah, sure.
the folks doing it. It's the, product and
Sure.
and prep and getting the best product. I mean, the guys are going to lay it, but when you get bad product consistently, good money after bad. So.
All right, I think now is a great time to take a break. We are going to break until 1 o'clock. So we're going to have a very quick break so we can get here and get to the decision making, the voting part of it. Right. We're ready to reconvene.
Okay, we are still on agenda item. I'll have to look for 4A. Thank you, City Attorney, Deputy City Attorney. That concludes our presentations, and so what we have here is a slide deck that just re-summarizes the information again, and as requested, we've divided up the re-summarization by departments to help facilitate both discussion as well as any potential motions. I'm just going to click through some of these slides. For the public record, we included the same goals and priorities. But then this is the entire summary, again, of all requests, but we then have them broken up into the different categories. So this is the overview of the 9 total positions, 2 in support of our homeless encampment response and 7 for the police department. But then it's here outlined are the dollars, and we've split this up so that the call takers could be taken separate from the rest of the police.
All right, so I will turn to my colleagues for action. Is there a motion or any discussion on the first item, the call takers positions in the city manager's office for the Community Vitality Call Center?
Sorry, I was a little confused because it says slide 6 there, but in the packet we received, it's number 8. With respect to the items listed on what is now on the screen as page 6, but is in our packet as page 8, I would move that the committee vote in the affirmative or conclude that this is consistent with the recommendations or the Measure N funding intentions.
And for the record, you're talking about not just the city manager's office, but the entire, all the positions on the slide.
That is correct.
Okay. We have a motion from Vice Chair Campbell. Is there a second? All right. We have a motion from Vice Chair Campbell. We have a second from Committee Member Dewey. If there's any other discussion? All right, Madam Clerk, please call the vote. Yes. Thank you. You're your tech support today, Larry.
Motion is unanimously approved.
All right.
Okay, coming back to the next item. This is related to what's recurring operating. There's a couple different pieces to this. This is the highlight slide, but then we've broken it into 3 different components. We feel like this is responsive, although it could be broken to greater detail, but the Community Vitality Call Center is the first item. Again, there's a limited amount of funding there just for their operating costs. That's keeping the lights on. And then the $500,000 is to create, by contract, a team that focuses on the small number of high-frequency individuals that are really creating a big demand on our service system as the first item. And then the shelter capacity is, again, not designated to a singular project, but council has asked staff to analyze adding beds at our homeless shelter, looking at safe camps or tiny home type projects. And then lastly is the police real-time information center, those costs that are technology software subscription based that would be ongoing. So our expectation was that those would get, each of those 3 buckets would get taken up individually.
Okay. All right, I will turn to my colleagues. For the Community Vitality Call Center operating costs, is there a motion or any discussion?
I'm prepared to make a motion. I would move that for the first and third items on this list, the city manager's office funding and the police department funding, I would move for a resolution from this committee concluding that these are consistent with the objectives set forth and voted on by the Measure N voting public.
So we have a motion from Vice Chair Campbell taking up the $605,000 in the city manager's office for the call center and the $294,000 for the real-time information center in the police department. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second from Committee Member
I'd like to have a little
Madlin.
discussion about that before I vote, though. if you
Okay,
don't mind.
yes, definitely.
You know, I am still very concerned about growing recurring costs. And, you know, we're faced with constricting sales tax dollars. You know, we were flat this year. We're probably going to be flat next year, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. But I just continue to urge the council to set limitations on recurring expenses that are allocated to Measure N money, because it's very nice to be able to have, you know, $25 million in any given year for a specific project that comes up. That's how we funded the enterprise system that, you know, in the city. That's how we upgraded the communication system for the police department and the fire department. And as you chip away at those recurring costs, as you add those recurring costs, you chip away at your amount of money available for those special projects. So I just wanted to make that point before we move on. So.
Thank you, Committee Member Coleman. Any other comments from? Yes, go for it.
I completely agree with Committee Member Coleman, and I just want the record to be clear that when I am casting a vote in favor of finding that one of these measures is consistent with the intent of the Measure N vote, that does not mean that I am endorsing the spending as a wise use of public funds, because I don't believe that's the question before this committee. So with respect to our elected officials who get to make that call, I want to make it clear that from a citizens oversight perspective, I'm saying that, yes, I think it's consistent. It could be pigeonholed into one of the items, but I don't think it doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's a wise use of public funds, and I'll trust their discretion with that. And if they want my opinion, they can ask me.
And let me take a moment to just remind the committee that as we have in past years, we will reflect these comments in the report to council. I think in particular when our practice has been when there's been a minority vote for folks to express why, or maybe a dissenting vote for folks to express, if they want to, they can express the reasons, and we include that in the feedback that's sent up to the city council, as well as I think these, we note the distinctive comments where the committee is saying, we're wanting this to be, part of the record for the council. We'll do that. We'll pass it on to the council. So duly noted on both those comments. And I would just take a quick opportunity on this topic because it's really important. That I am in agreement on the recurring costs. And so you'll recall last week that we shared that we had reduced the budget by $3.2 million of other discretionary areas to make space for a few things that are very high priority. We feel like we still have to address certain strategic priorities, but we took other things out to make space for this so that we don't increase the recurring burden too much.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no other comments, Madam Clerk, if you'll please call the question.
Motion is unanimously approved.
All right. Now turning to the other item on the slate here, in economic and community development, the additional emergency shelter capacity at 1.5 million. Is there any discussion or is there a motion from my colleagues? I'm seeing none.
I'll make a motion.
Okay. We have a motion. What's your motion? Sorry. Okay. A motion from Committee Member Rojas Mora at the ECD dollars. The additional emergency shelter capacity is consistent. Is there a second? We have a second from Committee Member Madland. Is there any further discussion?
I just want to ask one question, if you don't mind.
Committee Member Campbell first, and then Committee Member Coleman.
I speak against the motion. My position, I think I've articulated previously in this meeting in my comments and questions regarding the use of this funding. And I submit that this is not consistent with what I believe the voters intended when they approved the language that was on the ballot. There was a mention of addressing homelessness, but it did not, I do not believe that the voters contemplated creating a massive bureaucracy of dependent nonprofit organizations without much accountability and without much results. So that's why I speak against the motion.
Thank you. Committee Member Coleman.
Well, mine was just a simple question, so sorry. When you presented that, you said the Community and Economic Development Department, the $1.5 million, was to analyze if you're going to be able to add beds. Is that an analysis, or is that adding beds?
Sorry, I'm thankful for the clarification, committee member. It is not for the analysis. That will just be part of our work that we do internally. That is a funding set aside to fund the actual beds. And by the way, we assume these are operating costs. That's why it's in the recurring operating. So if we were to expand BLNC beds, for example, that's going to increase our contract with Mercy House. They're going to have more dollars for the food and supplies and case management of those individuals. So these are assumed operating costs for the additional beds. What I was communicating, absent a more specific proposal, we're doing analysis to go back and recommend to council how they use that 1.5 specifically. Should it be more beds at BLNC? Should it be a safe camp with beds? Should it be a tiny homes project with beds? But the 1.5 is for the beds themselves.
Okay, thank you. So, my position on this particular one, although I share some of committee member Campbell's concerns about the whole how we spend money on homelessness. This particular case, I have always been a supporter of the Brundage, thank you very much. I got Niles in my brain. The Brundage Navigation Center, I think this goes to fuel that. So I would support this. I'm not sure that I would support some of the other homeless initiatives that are on the slate. So.
Any further discussion? Sure. Vice Chair Campbell.
I understand that you're exploring how this 1.5 million could be best used. Just doing some quick math and internet research, I found that the cheapest hotel in Bakersfield is $67 a night. That's the cheapest one that's listed on Google. So I'm sure if you go down to South Union, you could probably find some for a much better price. Multiply that by 50 people times 365 days, you could house 50 people in this hotel for $1.4 million.
Anything further?
Yes.
Committee Member Prince?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am looking at it from a different perspective because I know that there was not a exit poll done once these voters voted on these 13 measures. It does say specifically reducing homelessness through partnerships with service providers to increase outreach, sheltering, and construction of affordable housing. So I do think that it does fit in regards to the priorities in regards to this measure. My issue is based on the fact that I don't think we're doing enough to obtain funding through the state and federal government to offset some of these costs. And so because of the fact that it's a recurring cost as well, also, just like Mr. Coleman stated earlier, is an issue for me as well. So I won't be voting, well, my vote will be my vote, but that is my concern, and that also can be moved to the City Council for information purposes as well. I appreciate it.
Excellent. All right. Okay. Vice Chair Campbell.
Just to respond to that, I think you're reading from a description of the ballot measure that was provided by city staff. What was actually on the ballot is this language: to prevent cuts / improve 911 emergency response, police / fire protection, anti-gang / drug units, neighborhood police patrols, rapid response to assaults, robberies, gang violence, home burglaries, crime prevention, address homelessness, retain, attract jobs / businesses, and then buried in the very middle of the paragraph, unrestricted general revenue purposes. Shall the measure be adopted approving an ordinance establishing a 1 cent sales tax, providing $50 million annually until ended by voters, requiring independent audits, citizen oversight, all funds for Bakersfield. That's what was on the ballot. So that's to clarify my comments previously.
All right. All right. Seeing no other comments, Madam Clerk, please call the question.
Motion is approved with committee members Abernathy, Madland, and Campbell voting no.
All right. Moving on.
Okay, now we are to our capital improvement section. Again, this is the high-level summary that it's in 4 key sections, but we have a slide for a couple of these breaking it down. So we have our affordable housing program. as well as Open Door Network. And then the Real-Time Information Center for Policing, just for space, we would put those two up first, and then we have two more buckets. This was not asked earlier, but I do want to make note because it was brought up last week. We have been doing homework on Proposition 1, by the way, and it's not 100% clear precisely what those criteria are going to be, but it does appear to us that the housing for Proposition 1 is very focused on behavioral health supportive housing. And while there will be supportive services at the Open Door Network, it is not, we don't assume that it will qualify for what we would consider to be a supportive behavioral health dedicated housing. But I would also note to the committee that as staff, we will be discussing with the council that there's more than one way to potentially fund this particular project. I would note that we have a council referral on the record that this is a priority topic that council wants staff to come back and address. But we have looked at different potential funding sources. But this, this is one recommendation to, at least consider whether it's consistent with the measure. But I think council will have a tough choice of how they decide to allocate those dollars for this project. But that is still the recommendation and decision before the body today, is to determine whether it is consistent with the priorities identified for the measure.
Thank you. So I'll turn to my colleagues. Do we have a motion or any discussion on the request from ECD for the Affordable Housing Program and then the $2.5 million for the Open Door Network?
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Yes, Vice Chair Campbell.
I would move that with respect to the Open Door Network funding of $2.5 million and the police department $600,000 on this slide, I would move that we make a finding that those two items are consistent with the measure and objectives.
Right. Is there a second?
Oh, I'm sorry, was that an R or R?
They are.
R, two of them.
Can we be clear that you're talking about the Open Door Network and the police department real-time information center?
That's correct. The items that are on the slide that's before us now, slide 10. So there are three.
Not the $3 million.
Right. I'm talking about the Open Door Network for $2.5 million and the police department for $600,000. Those are the subject matter of my motion.
I second.
All right. We have a motion from, hold just 1 second, Committee Member Vice Chair Campbell, a second from Committee Member Matland, and then discussion. Mr. Coleman.
I just want to discuss, I'm not supportive of the $2.5 million to Open Door Network. Not that I don't support the Open Door Network, I do. I actually do a lot of work with the Open Door Network, but I don't think we should be first in with $2.5 million when they need to raise $41 million. I'm sure there's going to be an opportunity for the city to invest in that project. I don't know that now is the time. So that's my only objection to that.
If I may suggest that there could be an amendment if you want to split those two out, but if you want to take them together, that's okay as well.
Just to respond to that last, as I said previously, when I'm proposing that we make an affirmative finding, it's because I believe that it's consistent with the objectives of Measure N, not necessarily that it's because I believe it's a wise use of the city's funds. With respect to the Open Door Network, the reason I submit that this is consistent with the measure is that I do recall at the time of this ballot measure, there was a significant concern expressed in the community about growing homelessness and the need for expanded shelter capacity. And this funding directly is aimed at providing shelter capacity. So I don't know whether Open Door Network owned its building that it had before. It was taken by the state of California, but they would be compensated under the eminent domain rules, and they would have additional funds to contribute toward this project. And as we've seen it with other proposals, there are other grant funding sources. So obviously this will not cover the whole thing, but I believe that this is consistent with the objectives that were set forth and voted on by the public.
If I just may, because I am aware of some of the additional details of the funding mix that's being pursued, not asked, but I think it's relevant to the comments. So we do know that Open Door Network has, first off, they did receive compensation for the taking of their property, which has been used to purchase the new property. So that's a cost that's already been taken care of and addressed. But also, they have received a $9 million earmark from the federal government and have received $1 million in state funding, HAP funding that's going towards this project. And I know that they're pursuing other funding, sources, both through grants as well as, private, donations and philanthropy. So there are some funding sources but many still to be identified. But there are some notable that are in the funding mix, and they do assume a funding mix that pursues multiple different funding sources.
I have just one question, because I think it happened on the last vote. So I just want to clarify for our committee members on process. If you are a motion maker or a motion seconder, are you allowed to vote against your motion? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
You are correct. That if you make a motion and a second in favor of consistency, for example, but yet you can't change your vote and vote against it. But that is true.
But there was discussion, as we've had many times,
Yeah.
and other members,
Yeah.
upon doing a second, if I would have, different members here, it's like, if I would have looked at it like that, I would have.
Totally understand. I just want to be consistent for process points. Yeah.
And you can always remove. No. You can remove a second or a motion from a procedural standpoint.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Just want to make sure that we're procedurally correct.
Mr. Chair, before we vote, for clarification purposes, with the 2.5 with the Open Door Network, again, this funding will not be touched until the entire amount is received by this entity for what they are proposing?
Yes, but let me give a little clarification on that. I'm glad you asked, committee member. So this funding would be contingent on Open Door Network identifying enough funding to move forward with the project. I would argue that this would be probably ultimately a city council decision, but if they chose to phase the project, that could be a possibility. But unless they could move forward with an entire phase, we would not allocate the funding.
Okay. Then also for the record, it is of my opinion that in reducing homelessness would also reduce crime in our community. Thank you.
I hate to add one more process issue or wrinkle into this. I would have to abstain from the motion as currently constructed because I'm a current board member for the Open Door Network. I'm fine with abstaining from the motion if there's, not, a solution here, but I would like to vote on the other items on the screen. Yeah.
I was unaware of that when I
Sorry.
brought this motion, so I would move to amend the motion to sever the Police Department Real-Time Information Center for separate consideration.
Thank you. And does our second agree to that?
I would second that.
Well, I think our original second has to agree, correct, Mr. Rednick?
No.
Yeah, I believe it's amended motion, so it's a new motion then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anybody can second?
Whoever can make it.
Okay. Jump ball.
I'll second that.
Okay. All right. Madam Clerk, please call the question. Oh, sorry, I need to restate the motion. So the motion is the Open Door Network, the 2.5 million is consistent with the measure.
Chair, it's the, just the police.
Oh, we have to vote on the amended motion. Thank you.
You have to vote to amend the motion.
Okay. So we're voting to amend the motion.
Yeah, which is to sever, my second motion was to amend the original motion to sever the Police Department Real-Time Information Center. So a yes vote would be to separate,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, okay.
And Madam Clerk, you're prepared for that? Do you need a second? Since we're doing this real time.
It's already been seconded.
So can you clarify what we're voting on?
We're voting on the amended motion, like to allow the amendment to the motion.
To allow it.
Yes. Sorry.
Should have done it the first.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Okay. All right, turning back to the items now. Thank you. So now we have an amended motion on the floor that is just for the Open Door Network for the 2.5 million, that it's consistent with the measure. We have do we need a second on that?
It's already been seconded.
It's already been seconded. Okay, we're good. Call the question.
Can you repeat who did the second, please?
Mr. Coman.
That was Ms. Madeline, the original motion.
Well, the original motion maker was Committee Member Madland.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Ortiz abstaining.
All right. Now we return to the other items.
I would like to make another motion then. I would move that we find the Police Department Real-Time Information Center funding of $600,000 is consistent with the measure and objectives, and that we approve it.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Campbell. Do we have a second? Second. A second from Committee Member Abernathy. Do we have any further discussion on this one? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the question.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Right. Okay. The other item left is the Affordable Housing Program, the $3 million allocation.
I'd like to make a motion that it is consistent with addressing homelessness.
All right.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Committee Member Rojas Mora, a second from Committee Member Perez Andreessen. Any further discussion?
I would like to speak against the motion.
Go for it.
To refresh everyone's recollection, we discussed this last week, and there was a presentation where we learned that in some instances, the units that are constructed with this money actually cost more to the beneficiaries of this program than they would cost just on the actual open market if the landlord listed the item for sale. And it almost seems like an absurdity that we've reached the point where our state regulatory burden has created such a shortage of housing that we now have to create these extremely expensive incentives to build new housing that in some cases costs more than it would on the open market, as the information presented to us showed us. When the words address homelessness appeared on that ballot measure, as is obvious from our conversation here, those words don't mean the same thing to everyone, and I'm aware of the fact that my interpretation and my speculation as to the intent of the voters is no more valid than anyone else's here, and which is why there are so many of us on this committee. I think the intent was to have a diversity of viewpoints and diversity of opinions, and I think that the voters probably also had that diversity of viewpoints and opinions. So I'm not arrogant enough to presume to speak for all of the voters, but somehow I ended up on this committee where my opinion was sought as part of citizen oversight, and whether these proposals are consistent with what I believe the voters voted on. And after the presentation last week and the conversation we had, I do not believe that this type of use of tax money was what the voters intended when they voted right after a long list of criminal problems and blight on the community that we were going to address with this money. The words address homelessness appears, which to me implies we're going to use this money to deal with the crime and the public blight that we see from homelessness. And building expensive units that might actually cost more than a market rate unit is not a solution to that problem. And so I'm urging my colleagues to vote no on this one.
Committee Member Cohen?
Thank you. And I don't mean to put Member Campbell on the spot, but can you elaborate a little bit how you differentiate this one from the Open Door Network, which you did feel was within the Measure N? Thank you.
Yes, the way this program was explained to me and to all of us last week is that there's a federal poverty guideline that is used to calculate how much rent somebody theoretically can afford, and that's how we get the term affordable housing. And then a landlord who has to, or a real estate developer rather, has to spend extra money because they're getting federal and state grants to build this housing, to make these expensive units, and then they charge rent based on a fee schedule that's based on a price that's fixed by the government based on the income level of the occupants of the dwelling. So that money actually is a rent-paying tenant who's a low-income person. We have not seen evidence that ties the homelessness problem, which, in my view, is primarily driven by this state's complete disregard for the consequences of drug addiction. And what the voters were voting on, in my view, was to deal with the crime and the what we see as homeless people sleeping on the sidewalk. Sometimes you have people that are confronted or encountered by people that are mentally deranged because of drug use or whatever other reason, mental health problems that have not been addressed. That's what people were trying to alleviate by voting on this Measure N money. And that's why I see an actual homeless shelter, which is a shelter that is intended not to be a permanent housing solution, but to be a kind of a bridge. That's why I see that as consistent, and that's distinct from this affordable housing program, which is where we're subsidizing real estate developers to help them build more expensive housing than the market organically would create. And I just think that it's just it's absurd, given the objectives that we have. So those are my comments.
All right. Any further comments from my colleagues? Committee Member Madeline?
Actually, I do agree. Someone, it would be wonderful, but we're not getting to the source of the mental health and the drug addiction problem, and throwing money at housing. There is no simple answer at this point. But throwing $3 million at housing and maybe not treatment beds and the other issues that were brought up today, throwing housing is not going to solve a problem like this.
Any further questions, comments? All right, Madam Clerk, please call the question.
Motion failed with Committee Member Abernathy, Coman, Madland, Prince, and Campbell voting no.
All right. Thank you. And City Manager Clegg, you feel you have enough context to provide to the City Council around the vote?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Moving on to Public Works Department.
Yes, so this is the streets lineup. We just had that presentation today. I won't belabor it more. I'll leave it back to the committee.
Wonderful. Turning to my colleagues, any motions, discussions on the Public Works Department requests?
Well, I would make a motion to separate out, to move for street lighting improvements, multimodal infrastructure, separate from the other four.
Then do you want to make a motion to, do you want to change that construction a little bit and make a motion to find certain things that are consistent out of the list, and then we
Well,
can
then I
take
could
the
do-
remainder?
I find four of them consistent,
Mm-hmm.
which would be the 5899, no, excuse me. I find two of them consistent. Street lighting and multimodal.
Okay. Are consistent?
Am I on the wrong page? Oh. Sorry, Lindsay. Yeah, well, these are the three I don't.
So so street lighting improvements and the multimodal infrastructure you're saying are consistent or the subject of your motion?
Well, or I'd like to just separate those,
Or do you want-
seven out, because I think
You wanna
they
vote on
address
them
different things, and I don't think
one
the
at a time?
voters. Yeah, that's my recommendation.
Right. So instead of taking, I mean, what I would recommend is instead of taking a vote about whether to separate them out, we just process-wise separate them out. So is there a motion on street lighting improvements?
I'll move that we find the street lighting improvements proposal consistent with the Measure N objectives.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Yes. We have a motion by Vice Chair Campbell and a second by Committee Member Abernathy. Is there any discussion? All right, Madam Clerk, please call the question.
Motion is unanimously approved.
We'll move next to 5899 landscaping. Their motion.
I'll make it a motion to accept.
Right. We have a motion from Committee Member Dewey that it's consistent. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second by Committee Member Perez Andreessen. Any discussion? Vice Chair Campbell.
Yes, thank you. The objectives of the Measure N proposal as set forth on the ballot measure, I'm trying to figure out which category this fits in. The street lighting improvements, to me, would help to some extent with crime. With respect to these other items, it all sounds great. I would love to have all the streets beautified and the traffic calm and median improvements, especially if it's, to prevent danger to homeless people that are panhandling at the intersections. But I'm having a hard time finding where some of these items fit, where most of these items fit in this ballot measure. When the people voted on this, it's front-loaded with all this heavy emphasis on crime control and how we're going to deal with crime and the slow response times from the police department and all the things that were concerns at the time. And none of it included creating bigger bike lanes and better-looking medians. Those things are all appealing, but I just don't see how they fit here. So I would speak against the motion with pretty much all the rest of these, and so that way I don't have to repeat myself when we address them one at a time.
I second all those opinions.
Yes, Committee Member Cohen.
Yeah, I'm in between. The reason I say that is I'm not certain that the 5899 landscaping isn't needed or isn't warranted. But, the question that comes up is it Measure N worthy? All right. And I don't feel that the 5899 landscaping project really meets the intent of Measure N. Some of the other ones, like downtown improvements, street improvements, I can see how that does conform. but certainly the 5899 landscaping, I'll be honest with you, they've been doing work on the 5899 connection since I moved here in 1994. It's been nonstop. And they no sooner finished up, and you see them out there again working on stuff. So it looks like they're never going to stop working on this particular junction. But I will say that for me, those kind of improvements, although may be warranted, are certainly not what the intent of the Measure N was for. So, thank you.
Committee Member Madlin.
I agree. I mean, once we start looking at it this way, I mean, how many beds and how many resources could we utilize for mental illness, drug addiction, and beds? The resurfacing, I'll get with you. But that's my comment on that.
All right. So we have a motion and a second, so let's...
Mr. Chair, I have a question,
Yeah.
please, if you don't mind. If my question would be in regards to if this funding is not approved for the 5899 interchange, does this mean that this project will not go forward or it will not get done?
Committee Member Prince, let me answer that a couple different ways. So first, this will go first to the City Council to determine if they're going to move forward or not. So the City Council will take the feedback of the Advisory Committee, the Oversight Committee, and determine if they'll still include that in the budget or not. If the City Council does not include it in the budget, I don't think that the project will move forward. We have actually, specific to this project, we didn't get into every project detail. We are being able to match this funding against Caltrans funding. So Caltrans is about 50% in, and we're about 50% in. And so I don't think that the project would move forward unless we were able to go and get additional grant funding.
All right. Let's call the question.
Can you remind us who made the motion, who did the second?
Now you're really asking for me to...
Motion was made by Committee Member Dewey, seconded by Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Thank you. I'll keep better notes going forward.
One more comment. Just, even if we did the landscape, however you want to break it out, but you're looking at millions of dollars that could be associated to what some of this money was allocated for. And our biggest problem, homeless, mental illness.
All votes in?
Motion is approved with committee members Abernathy, Coman, Madland, and Campbell voting no.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to the multimodal infrastructure. Is there a motion on this one?
Please tell me again what multimodal is. I'm still
Well,
not clear on that.
Multimodal infrastructure does mean facilities for pedestrian, bicycle, principally. It could mean if there were other, multimodal just means a variety of modes. Theoretically, if there were a unique public transit project, rail project, we don't anticipate those probably in this coming year. This is pedestrian and bicycle.
Got it. Is there a motion? There's a lot of passion around this multimodal infrastructure here. All right, I'm inclined to move on. We can come back to it. Street corridor improvements, 18th and 19th Street. There,
I would make a motion to approve the street corridor improvements, 18th and 19th Street. I think that is consistent with the Measure N priorities and enhances the downtown. I see that differently than the 5899 corridor, so.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion by Committee Member Coleman, a second by Committee Member Prince. Any further discussion? All right, Madam Clerk, please call the question. Right.
Motion is approved with committee members Abernathy and Campbell voting no.
All right. Moving on to median improvements, $750,000. Colleagues, any comments, any motions? All right, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm prepared to move on. We can reconsider it at the end. Traffic calming allocation for $500,000. Any discussion, motions? All right. Resurfacing streets division, $2.5 million.
Yeah, I'll make a motion on this item. This is additional money already allocated in the general fund to perform street improvements, and I think that this is consistent with the Measure N priority.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion by Committee Member Coleman, a second by Committee Member Prince that this is consistent. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll, or please call the vote.
Motion is approved with committee members Madland and Campbell voting no.
Let's move on to the Recreation and Parks Department.
If I may make a suggestion, Chair, even if there's, we can move on to parks and then come back to these other topics, but you know, if there's not an interest in making a motion, I assume that there's probably not strong support.
Yes.
But I think for sake of just clarity in the public record, if someone wanted to make a motion to find that they're not consistent, just so that there's the record, and let the committee, you know, take that disposition, I think that would probably help, you know, communicate that record up to the council.
I think my takeaway, and colleagues jump in here, I mean, would be that, you know, there's died for lack of emotion. I mean, I think that would be my takeaway. I don't necessarily.
We could communicate it that way as well.
I agree with Mr. Clegg on this, that our committee has been asked whether we think this is consistent or inconsistent, so it's almost our duty, whether we feel strongly one way or the other about any of these, to at least give an opinion, and if you are totally indifferent, you can always abstain from the vote. So for the 3 items that we've skipped, I would move that the committee make a finding that they're not consistent with the Measure N priorities.
All right, we have a motion from Committee Member Campbell that these items are not consistent, so they are the 3 items that we did not take individually. It would be the multimodal infrastructure, the median improvements, and the traffic calming allocation. Is there a second? Second. We have a second from Committee Member Abernathy. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the question. Just exactly. Exactly. I almost said that. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Because the motion is that it's inconsistent, or is not consistent, sorry. Oh, I apologize. All right. Oh, sorry.
Motion is approved with committee members Dewey, Perez Andreessen, and Rojas Mora voting no.
Okay, and our final item is parks. We have those 3 items up for committee.
All right. Colleagues, any motions, discussion on these items?
I have a comment, and this goes for the items we just voted on as well. I want to express that, in my opinion, some of those measures are good ideas and a good use of public resources, but I voted the way I did on those with respect to whether they were consistent with the measure and priorities. The same goes for these park improvements. I really do appreciate the park district in this city. We have an excellent Recreation and Parks Department. They do an excellent job. We have many great parks. So I don't want my comments or my vote on this issue to in any way communicate to the council some kind of displeasure with the parks or a determination that these are unworthy expenditures. But I don't believe any of these items are consistent with the objectives of Measure N, and I hope that the city can find alternative funding sources for them.
Is that a motion?
So I'll move that the committee make a finding that these three items are not consistent with the Measure N priorities. I mean,
Yep.
unless somebody wants to separate them out, I mean, I don't want to presume.
See if there's a second before we open it up for discussion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there's a second from Committee Member Abernathy. Is there, Mr. Coleman, you had some comments?
Yeah, I just want to comment, because we go back and forth on, what's, what should be under Measure N, but, one of the biggest ones was, keeping the public areas clean and safe, and I think this really does go to that. We approved a whole park ranger program that's all paid for under Measure N, so, obviously the city council has determined that parks is something that's eligible under Measure N. I have a little problem with the out of control spending on there because we're spending $4.9 million. I think that without a consistent plan on Martin Luther King, until that's really defined what that's going to be, I have some issues with it. But I can't say that it's not within Measure N. So I would motion that we vote on these three individually.
We have a question on the table, so we'll have to get to,
Just to speed this along, I'll just simply withdraw my motion then so we can vote on these individually.
okay.
We just need a second on
So Committee Member, Vice Chair Campbell's motion is withdrawn. Committee Member Coleman has a motion that these are consistent. Is there a second?
No, we're going to vote on them separately.
Oh, you want to vote on it separately, I'm sorry.
Vote on them separately, and then so then there is no motion yet on any one item, so
Okay,
you have motions.
all right. Is there a motion on the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center grant match, the $3 million allocation?
I'll make a motion that it is.
We have a motion from Committee Member Rojas Mora. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Committee Member Prince. Any further discussion? Committee Member Madland.
Discussion, I just have to go back to our biggest problem throughout the country, but what we're dealing with here is mental illness, drug addiction, and homeless. The more beds, the more treatment, everything that we've been discussing falls more in line with that on, we can make the parks better once we get some of those things handled.
Any further comments?
I do. I have
Yes.
one. Just to correct Mr. Coleman, at least in my opinion, we didn't take care of park rangers forever. They're on payroll for 30 years with health benefits and then pensions. Somebody has to fund that. We didn't fund it for the next 55 years. So when you fund these things, everybody understand you may be voting for 1 year's worth of payroll here and benefits, but they go on forever. So you have to think about what you're putting on the city to continue to fund with this sales tax.
My understanding is that the line item one, the park is a grant match. There is no recurring cost.
That's correct.
All right. Any further comments?
I would have one comment.
Mm-hmm.
I would distinguish all of these funding requests from the Park Ranger program because the Park Ranger program is specifically a law enforcement, has a law enforcement objective to deal with crime in the parks, to relieve the burden on the police department that had to deal with all those calls previously. So it is directly in line with the intent of the Measure N as expressed on the ballot measure itself. There was nothing on there about repaving the pickleball courts or any of the other things that we've been using this money for. So, I would wager that if we put the first line on the ballot measure, this funding will be used to repave the pickleball courts at Jastrow Park, and we will improve our park benches, and would you like to pay more taxes for that? The answer probably would have been no. This ballot measure barely passed by like 100 votes when it was heavily marketed as a solution to the growing crime problem and homeless problem. So the way that these monies are being used, I just don't think that's consistent at all. And that goes for all three of these items. I say that now, so I won't repeat myself later.
All right. Any further comments? Madam Clerk, please call the question. All right.
Motion is approved with committee members Abernathy, Coman, Madlin, and Campbell voting no.
We have park amenities and reno improvements and the allocation of $1 million.
I have a question. How come it keeps looking like everything's 4 to 4? Is there somebody not on this map?
Our system only allows for 8 on the screen, but there's 9 total.
I've been so confused. Thank you.
Committee Member Rojas Mora is being left off, not intentionally.
You know, I'm a poli-sci major, but I can do basic math. All right. Is there a motion on the park amenities and reno improvements line item?
I would like to make a motion to approve and that these park amenities and reno improvements is included in the PVS project funding.
All right. Is there a second? We have a motion from Committee Member Prince, a second from Committee Member Perez Andreessen. Is there any further comments? Madam Clerk, please call the question.
Motion is approved with committee members Abernathy, Madlin, and Campbell voting no.
All right. And now to our final item, the Jastrow Park improvements at $900,000. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that the Jastrow Park improvements are in line with the Measure N.
A motion from Committee Member Prince. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Committee Member Rojas Mora. Any further discussion? All right. Madam Clerk, please call the question.
Motion is approved with committee members Abernathy, Coman, Madlin, and Campbell voting no.
All right, next item, please.
Commissioner comments.
All right. Yes, we are done. Do we have any comments? I would just like to make one. Sorry for drawing this out. You know, I think I appreciate the comments of Committee Member Abernathy and Committee Member Campbell around, you know, the fact that while we have approved these or said that the majority of these items that have been brought before us are consistent with the measure, I think, you know, at least my message back to the City Council is given the softness in revenues, given the forecast that we're going to see lower revenues both in the main general fund sources and PSVS, given the softness in terms of the state budget and how that has potential to impact the city, I would advise the City Council that just because we have said these items are consistent, that the City Council does not have to necessarily budget all of these items, and that at least my request for them, I don't know if my colleagues would join that, is that they show a significant amount of discretion as they move through their budget process this year.
I have an additional comment as well. this is really directed for the council, and maybe this will be the most controversial thing I've said up here, but the projection was $50 million annually in revenue to the city of Bakersfield, and the PSVS tax has significantly outperformed those projections every year. And so I would ask that rather than finding new and innovative ways to spend that money, we put to the voters the question whether they want to reduce the sales tax by 0.5 cent.
Committee Member Madlin?
My comment to the council, once again, I don't know how many millions of dollars that were approved today, but the more I've kind of seen the points that have been brought on, we're not addressing the initial problem that destroys the parks, that makes them, you know, make a nice park. Is that then going to be an encampment? Hopefully not. But I see just how many beds and mental health care workers are needed over some of these items at this point. You know, at this point, well, there are people that just are in severe mental health crisis. And we just, you know, allocated millions of dollars or suggested that maybe could start stemming the root of the issue, which is the mental health. You know, and then you add the, you know, drug addiction, which is not Johnny, my neighbor's friend Johnny's a drug addict. It's the drug addiction with mental health patients exemplifies immensely. So it's just, you know, we're talking about beds and help, and then we're decorating a park. And I think definitely should love to have it done, but where do you start? And that would be my comment to the council.
Committee Member Coleman?
Yeah, my comment's not for the council. My comment is for this commission. And, you know, we have a great group of people and diversity of opinions. And I think it goes to what what makes the city of Bakersfield strong, is that we do have a very diverse population with a lot of different opinions, but we're all able to get into a room and reach a consensus on most things. And so I think that makes the city of Bakersfield stronger. I didn't agree with everything, but, you know, it's not on me to decide that stuff. And so I thank the rest of the commissioners for their input, their opinions, and their perspectives, and it makes me a better person. So thank you.
I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you. Committee Member Prince?
Well, you know, Mr.
Just
Dreesen-
quickly, I just wanted to thank the city staff and the city manager for
Yes.
your time in putting all the materials together, the time presenting for the last 2 weeks, and for answering all the questions. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Committee Member Prince?
Thank you. I think the Public Works Department has probably already left, but
They got their votes.
something I even asked for a couple years ago was the fact that when people see their tax dollars at work, they acknowledge it. And unfortunately, I don't think we do a good job of letting the community know that we are actually, this is where our tax dollars, our measure in dollars are going. And I know in other cities, you would see signs with the public works departments, and they would have, hey, your tax dollars at work. So they would know and see if they're in the neighborhood, you know, cleaning up the trash or paving the streets or doing whatever they're doing. The signs would indicate that, and the community would see. So I would just recommend that they consider that in the future, being able to display more when they are doing the work of the community. People can see the tax dollars at work.
Thank you, committee member. And I've been careful to be respectful to receive the feedback from the committee and not jump in on your comments and let those stand for the record. But I did want to note, based on your prior feedback, we have been adding to any like our police vehicles and the park ranger vehicles. They say, you know, provided by Measure N or PSVS. And we've been doing that for some of our park projects, but good point. I don't think we've done that for our streets projects to date. This is only the first year that we've had some street projects this current year and this coming year. So good suggestion. We'll add that to our public works projects as well.
All right. Seeing no other comments, we are adjourned.